Derek Vance grabbed the gloves off the equipment table and hurled them straight at Caleb Warren's chest in front of 200 people. "Get on this mat," Derek said, his voice cutting through every conversation in the room. "You won't last 10 seconds. The crowd laughed. Caleb caught the gloves, then set them down, quietly, deliberately, like a man who had already decided this wasn't worth his time, and that decision alone was more terrifying than anything Derek could throw at him. Nobody in that room knew why, but one retired Marine in the front row did, and the color just drained from his face. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss where this goes. The Iron Ridge Tactical Academy sat on 22 acres of sun-baked land just outside San Diego, California, close enough to the Pacific that on quiet mornings you could smell the salt in the air before the heat burned it away. It was the kind of place that took itself seriously. Concrete walls hung with championship brackets, framed photographs of decorated veterans, motivational phrases stenciled in military font above every doorway. The parking lot filled with trucks and SUVs bearing unit stickers and combat tour decals. The atmosphere carried the particular pressure of a place where men measured themselves constantly against each other. On the third Saturday of October, the Academy hosted its annual charity exhibition, a day-long event that brought in sponsors, active duty personnel, veterans' families, local press, and roughly 200 supporters who paid entry fees that went directly toward transition programs for veterans re-entering civilian life. It was Iron Ridge's most visible event of the year, and the Academy's director, Rachel Monroe, ran it with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was at stake in terms of reputation, funding, and community trust. But if you asked anyone in that building to name the star attraction, they would give you the same answer without hesitating. Derek Vance, 31 years old, undefeated in 15 sanctioned competitions, black belt under 2 separate systems. The kind of physical specimen that drew attention the moment he walked into a room. Broad shoulders, fluid movement, the unconscious confidence of someone who had never lost in a setting that mattered to him. He taught advanced combatives 3 days a week at Iron Ridge, and his classes filled within hours of registration opening each semester. Derek was by every measurable standard the Academy used its most valuable asset. He knew it. He made sure everyone else knew it too. By noon that Saturday, Derek had already worked through 3 challengers on the exhibition mat. At 2 active duty Marines and a decorated amateur competitor from a gym in Escondido. He had not broken a sweat. Between bouts, he worked the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had been performing for audiences long enough to understand that the show extended well beyond the mat itself. He signed programs. He posed for photographs. He accepted compliments with the studied humility of a man who had practiced that expression in mirrors. And periodically between interactions, his eyes moved to a man working quietly near the north equipment wall. Caleb Warren, 39 years old. Medium height, medium build. The kind of man who looked like he belonged in the background of any given room, which was largely why he had managed to work at Iron Ridge for 2 years without accumulating much of a story in anyone's mind. He was the Academy's logistics and safety coordinator, a title that sounded more official than it felt in practice. In practical terms, Caleb fixed things. He inspected the training equipment for wear and structural failure. He maintained the emergency communication systems. He ran safety compliance checks before major events. He repaired the heavy bags when their chains weakened. He replaced the padding along the wall rails when it compressed past acceptable impact tolerance. He also, without exception, left by 3:15 every weekday afternoon, because his daughter Sophie got out of school at 3:30, and the drive to Eastbrook Middle School took 12 minutes without traffic and 18 with it, and Caleb Warren had not once been late picking her up in the 2 years he had worked at Iron Ridge. That detail, the leaving at 3:15, the daughter, the school pickup, was the detail most people at the Academy knew about Caleb. It had become in certain conversations a kind of quiet punchline. Not cruel exactly. More the way some workplaces absorb information about an employee who doesn't quite fit the ambient culture and compress it into a shorthand that's easier to carry than complexity. That's Caleb. Single dad. Real careful about the equipment. Leaves early. Derek had developed his own shorthand, which was considerably less charitable. It had started 7 months earlier during a safety inspection before a regional competition. Caleb had flagged 2 impact barriers as non-compliant and recommended postponing 2 scheduled bouts until the equipment was replaced. The competition organizer had pushed back. Caleb had stood firm quietly without raising his voice, without apologizing for the disruption, and the bouts had been postponed. Derek had lost a billing arrangement with the organizer as a result, and he had decided in the way that prideful men sometimes do, that the most convenient explanation for his frustration was the man who had caused it. After that, the comments had started. Small ones at first. Observations made to other instructors within earshot. Questions about whether the academy really needed someone spending half the day with a wrench when they could hire a maintenance crew. Remarks about safety concerns being the refuge of men who lacked the nerve for actual risk. Caleb had heard every one of them and responded to none, which Derek had interpreted incorrectly as confirmation that his assessment was accurate. The 4th bout of the exhibition began at 12:47. Derek had returned to the mat after a 15-minute break and was demonstrating a takedown sequence for the audience when Caleb stepped forward from his position near the equipment wall. Not aggressively, not dramatically. He simply moved into the edge of Derek's peripheral vision and said in a voice calibrated to carry to Derek and not much farther. The grip variation you're using on that sequence puts lateral pressure on the training partner's cervical spine. At full demonstration speed, the risk of soft tissue injury is significant. Derek turned slowly. He looked at Caleb the way some men look at an interruption they have already decided is not worth engaging, a long, flat stare that communicated dismissal more efficiently than words. "Noted," Derek said. Then he repeated the sequence at full speed. Caleb said nothing. He returned to the equipment wall. He picked up his clipboard and made a notation. Derek watched him do it. Something about the act. The quiet documentation. The absence of argument. The refusal to escalate irritated Derek in a way he couldn't fully articulate. It felt like being dismissed. Like being told without a word that the response to his defiance wasn't anger or confrontation, but simply a record made for later reference. He finished the demonstration to applause and stepped off the mat. His training partner for the bout, a 24-year-old instructor named Ricky Salazar, rolled his neck carefully and said almost to himself, "Yeah, that one pulled a little." Derek said nothing, but his eyes went back to Caleb. The incident that changed everything happened at 1:17 in the afternoon. Derek had returned to the mat for a demonstration involving joint control techniques, a sequence that was impressive to watch, but required his training partner to absorb significant pressure on the shoulder and elbow joints. Ricky had tapped out of this particular demonstration 2 weeks earlier in practice, citing discomfort in his right shoulder, and Derek had quietly arranged for a different partner, a newer instructor named Brendan Cole, who was young enough and eager enough to mistake tolerance of pain for toughness. Caleb had been watching the setup from the equipment area. He had seen the way Brendan rolled his right shoulder twice before stepping onto the mat, a small, involuntary gesture that looked like habit but was actually compensation. He had noted the way he noted everything at Iron Ridge, with the quiet, systematic attention of a man whose professional history had made observation not a skill but a survival mechanism. When Derek began the sequence, and Brendan's body language shifted into the specific rigidity of someone absorbing more than they should, Caleb walked forward. He did not run. He did not shout. He walked with the particular unhurried purposefulness of someone who has calculated exactly how much time remains before a situation becomes irreversible. "Stop the demonstration," he said clearly. The room went quiet. Derek paused with Brendan's arm, controlled in a joint lock that held another 2 seconds at that angle would have produced a grade 2 elbow sprain at minimum. He looked at Caleb. "Excuse me. Your partner's right shoulder is compromised. He's been compensating for it for the last 4 minutes. The joint lock you're holding right now has approximately 1.5 seconds before you exceed the rotational tolerance of a pre-stressed elbow. Stop the demonstration." Brendan, for what it was worth, said nothing. Because Brendan's jaw was clenched and his face had gone a particular shade of pale, that confirmed everything Caleb had just said. Derek released the lock. He straightened up. He looked at the crowd, 200 people watching in complete silence, and he looked at Rachel Monroe standing at the side of the room with an expression that had become carefully neutral. And then he looked at Caleb Warren, who was already moving toward Brendan to check on him, clipboard tucked under his arm, moving with the complete indifference of a man who had not done this to make a point, but because the situation required it. That indifference was the wrong thing to encounter in that particular moment. Derek picked up a pair of training gloves from the equipment table beside him. He threw them. Not gently, not as a casual invitation. He threw them the way you throw something when you want the throw itself to be a statement, hard and accurate and public, so that everyone watching understood exactly what was happening. The gloves hit Caleb in the chest. Caleb caught them. He looked down at the gloves. Then he looked up at Derek. "You think you know combat," Derek said. His voice had an edge to it that 200 people recognized immediately as the edge that precedes something irreversible. "You think you know what real looks like? Get on this mat. Let's settle what you actually know." The room held its breath. Caleb looked at the gloves in his hands for a moment. Then he set them on the equipment table with the same careful deliberateness with which he had set down his clipboard moments before. "No," he said simply. Derek's jaw tightened. "No." He moved forward 2 steps, closing the distance in a way that was clearly calculated to produce either capitulation or confrontation. He was 4 inches taller than Caleb and 50 pounds heavier in muscle. He was 31 years old, and Caleb was 39, and there was not a single person in that room who would have bet on the older man. "You come onto my mat in front of my people, and you tell me how to do my job, and you won't even back it up." "I'm not here to back anything up," Caleb said. "I'm here to make sure nobody gets injured on equipment I'm responsible for. Brendan's shoulder needs ice and an evaluation. I'd recommend you bring in a substitute partner before continuing." "What I'd recommend," Derek said, and his voice had dropped now into the particular register that the crowd recognized as preceding something they would talk about afterward, "is that you stop hiding behind a clipboard and show me what you actually know." "I'm not hiding behind anything." "Then prove it." Derek gestured at the mat. 10 seconds. That's all I'm giving you. You won't last 10 seconds. 200 people were completely silent. Caleb looked at Derek for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read. Not fear, and not anger, and not the performative calm of someone managing their reaction for an audience. It was something quieter than any of those things. Something that looked to anyone paying close enough attention, like patience. Like a man who had calculated the terrain and already knew where every exit was. He said, "I won't fight you, Derek." The crowd exhaled something that wasn't quite laughter, but was close enough that Derek's chin came up. "Of course you won't." "Not because I can't," Caleb said. And something shifted in his voice, not dramatically, not theatrically, just a small tonal change that landed in the room like a key turning. "Because there's no reason to." Derek picked up another pair of gloves from the table and held them out. 10 seconds, he said. In front of everyone. Show me I'm wrong. Caleb looked at the gloves. He looked at Rachel Monroe. He looked at Brendan Cole sitting against the wall now with his right arm elevated and an expression of visible relief that the demonstration had stopped. Then he did something that no one in the room expected. He reached up and unclipped the watch from his left wrist. It was an old watch, a military field watch worn down to the case on the left side, where years of contact with gear had stripped the finish. He set it on the equipment table next to the gloves. He had already declined, and he looked at it for just a moment, and then he stepped onto the mat. In the first row, a man named Gerald Hutchins, 63 years old, retired Marine Corps. 3 combat deployments, stopped smiling. He had been smiling until that moment. He was not smiling now, because Gerald Hutchins recognized the watch. And more importantly, he recognized the way Caleb Warren moved when he stepped onto that mat. Gerald Hutchins had spent 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. He had trained alongside men from every branch of the Special Operations community. He had been in rooms with people who were considered without exaggeration among the most capable human beings on the planet, in terms of their ability to move through dangerous situations and bring other people home. The way Caleb Warren crossed that mat was the way those men moved. Not aggressive. Not performative. Not the practiced confidence of an athlete entering their arena. Quiet. Economical. Every movement exactly as large as it needed to be, and no larger. Weight balanced on the back edge of both feet. Hands low. Eyes tracking without apparent effort. Gerald Hutchins said quietly to the person sitting beside him, "Oh Lord." Derek Vance attacked at the bell. He came in fast and direct, a combination he had used to end every one of his 15 competitive bouts. Pressure and forward movement and overwhelming physical commitment that had broken through every guard he had ever encountered in competition. At 1 second he closed the distance. At 2 seconds, his first strike found air where Caleb's body had been a fraction of a second earlier. At 3 seconds, a second combination produced nothing. At 5 seconds, Derek shifted his approach, less straight line, more angular, the adjustment of a trained fighter, making real-time tactical decisions, and his angle of attack simply ceased to be relevant because Caleb was not where the angle pointed. The movement Caleb used was not dramatic. He was not dancing. He was not performing. He was not making Derek look foolish with theatrical footwork. He was simply not there, each time. Not quite where he needed to be for Derek's attack to connect. Moving exactly enough, and never more than that. At 8 seconds, Derek threw a combination that was the most technically sophisticated sequence of the entire exchange. A feinted level change into a takedown setup, and Caleb moved through it like it was a doorway he had already measured. At 10 seconds, Derek had not touched him. Not once. The crowd was silent. Derek reset. He circled. His breathing had changed. Not from exertion, the exchange had lasted 10 seconds, and he was in superb physical condition. His breathing had changed because something had happened in those 10 seconds that had never happened to him in 15 professional bouts and 6 years of serious competition. He had attacked with full commitment and made no contact. Not because his opponent had defended. Not because his opponent had countered. Not because his opponent had done anything offensive or defensive at all in the way competition defined those terms. Because his opponent had simply declined to be there. He looked at Caleb. Caleb was standing with his hands at his sides, weight-balanced, breathing normally. His expression had not changed. He had not looked at the crowd. He had not acknowledged the silence. He was simply standing in the same patient stillness with which he had crossed the mat 2 minutes earlier. Derek attacked again. Harder this time. With the escalating investment of a competitor who has never lost and cannot yet compute what losing means for everything that comes after. Caleb moved, and moved, and moved. At the 20-second mark, Derek, for the first time in his adult competitive life, reached for something he did not have. He reached for certainty about where his opponent was going to be. He reached for the predictive read that his years of training had made automatic. He reached for it and found nothing because the man in front of him was not operating from the same predictive framework that Derek's training had been designed to counter. He was operating from something different. Something older. Something that had been developed not in a gym under fluorescent lights, with a coach watching and a mat to land on, but in environments where the cost of a wrong read was not a point on a scorecard. At the 28-second mark, Derek made his mistake. He came in with his weight forward, and his balance committed a move that in every competitive context he had ever occupied was a finishing movement, because at that level of commitment, you were either succeeding or your opponent was not good enough to exploit it. Caleb stepped to the outside of his lead leg. One hand caught Derek's wrist. The other found the back of his collar. And Derek Vance, undefeated black belt champion of Iron Ridge Tactical Academy, went from vertical to horizontal, in a movement so quiet and efficient that the crowd did not fully process it until he was already on the ground. He was on his back. Caleb was beside him, not on top, not controlling, not applying the mechanical advantage that would have ended the exchange definitively. He had simply placed Derek on the floor and then stepped back. He offered his hand. Derek stared up at him, then at the ceiling, then at the crowd. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then it broke not into applause exactly, but into the particular charged murmur of 200 people trying to reconcile what they had just seen with what they had expected to see. Derek took the hand. He stood. He looked at Caleb. And Caleb looked back at him with the same expression he had worn since the moment the gloves had hit his chest. Patient. Settled. Entirely indifferent to the theater of what had just happened. 10 seconds was never the problem, Caleb said. Then quietly, knowing when to stop is. He stepped off the mat. He picked up his watch from the equipment table and clipped it back onto his left wrist. He picked up his clipboard. He walked back toward the north equipment wall, and in the front row, Gerald Hutchins watched him go with an expression that was equal parts recognition and something that looked very much like concern. Because Gerald Hutchins had just watched a man take a nationally ranked black belt apart with the controlled economy of someone who was being careful. Careful. Not trying. Not competing. Not even fully engaged. Careful. Which meant the thing Caleb Warren had just shown them was not the full measure of what he could do. Not remotely close. The afternoon continued. The exhibition completed its scheduled program. Sponsors were thanked. Awards were presented. The crowd dispersed into the parking lot in the late afternoon San Diego sun, conversations overlapping and animated with the particular energy of people who had witnessed something unexpected and were still processing it. Derek Vance signed no autographs. He stood at the edge of the mat long after the crowd had moved away, arms crossed, staring at the floor with an expression that anyone who knew him would have identified as unfamiliar. Ricky Salazar approached him. "You all right?" "Fine." "Derek." I said fine. A pause. "Who is he?" Ricky looked toward the equipment wall where Caleb was methodically returning gear to its proper storage position. "Caleb. He does the safety coordination. Has been here like 2 years. He's got a kid, 12 or 13, I think. Picks her up from school every—" "That's not what I'm asking." Ricky was quiet. "Where did he train?" "I don't know. I've never seen him on the mat before today." Derek's jaw worked. "Find out," he said. 3 days later, Derek had talked to every instructor, every administrator, and every person at Iron Ridge who had any professional contact with Caleb Warren. What he had collected amounted to almost nothing. Caleb had been hired through a standard application process. His resume listed 2 years of facilities management at a private security training center in Virginia, and 1 year of consulting work for a federal contractor whose name produced no useful search results. Before that, his professional history was summarized in 3 words: United States Navy. No specifics. No unit designation. No deployment record accessible through standard channels. Derek had found one person at Iron Ridge who claimed to have asked Caleb directly about his military service, a veteran instructor named Frank Dupree, who had served 8 years in the Army before transitioning to civilian instruction work. "What did he tell you?" Derek asked. Frank shrugged. "Not much. Said he did some specialized work. Didn't get into specifics." "Specialized work. That's it." He mentioned his service ended when his wife passed. Said he needed to be home for his daughter. Frank paused. "I didn't push. You know how it is with some guys. They'll tell you when they're ready, and some of them are never ready." Derek pushed away from the table. "He moved like someone who's done that before," he said. "Not in a gym." Frank looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "I noticed that too." Rachel Monroe had noticed it for considerably longer. She had noticed it, in fact, within the first 3 months of Caleb's employment at Iron Ridge, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because Rachel Monroe had spent 12 years in environments where reading people quickly was a functional requirement, and what she read in Caleb Warren had never quite aligned with the role he occupied. He moved through the building with a systematic attention to entry and exit points that she had initially attributed to professional habit. He could identify approaching vehicles by sound before they were visible, a detail she had observed twice without ever mentioning to him. He had reorganized the Academy's emergency procedure documentation within his first month, producing a revised protocol that Iron Ridge's contracted security firm had subsequently adopted wholesale for their own facilities. And during a training exercise 3 months after he'd been hired, a simulated emergency evacuation drill that had devolved into the typical chaos of people ignoring procedure and moving instinctively rather than efficiently. Caleb had moved through the building in a specific pattern, making contact with specific people, and guided the entire facility population outside in 6 minutes and 43 seconds. The contracted security team's benchmark was 11 minutes. Rachel had said nothing at the time. She had watched. She had made a note. And she had subsequently looked more carefully at the file she had from Caleb's application process, which was where she had first noticed that the professional history before age 32 was essentially a wall present enough to satisfy a background check, detailed enough to explain the gap on a surface level, and entirely opaque beyond that surface level. She had not pressed him. She had watched. And what she had watched over 24 months was a man who was extraordinarily good at his job by a margin that made very little sense given what the job was. Not in the way that an overqualified person performs mechanical tasks with particular precision, but in the way that someone whose professional formation happened at a level fundamentally different from the level they currently operate at, brings an entirely different framework to whatever they do. After the exhibition, Rachel pulled Caleb's application file again. She read it more carefully this time. Then she picked up the phone and made 3 calls, not to anyone connected to Iron Ridge, and not to anyone whose name would appear in any professional context she was comfortable documenting. She got partial answers. And the partial answers were enough to tell her that the full answers were not accessible through the channels available to her. Which told her something by itself. Oh. It was Gerald Hutchins who finally said it out loud. Gerald had stayed after the crowd dispersed a favor to Rachel, who had known him for 6 years through mutual veterans community connections, and who had reached out to him the day after the exhibition. He sat in her office with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand and described what he had seen in Caleb Warren's movement with the vocabulary of a man who had spent 22 years in proximity to people who moved that way. "The footwork isn't sport," he said. "Sport footwork is about angles and distance management relative to a defined exchange. What he does is environmental. He's reading space, not an opponent. That's a different skill set. That's something you build in situations where the mat ends and the floor doesn't." "What kind of situations?" Rachel asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "The kind where there's no bell," he said. Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Gerald." The watch he was wearing. Gerald set his coffee cup down. "Where did you see it?" "I recognize the case," he said carefully. "A particular variant of the Mk2 field watch. They weren't standard issue. They came from a specific procurement channel. You had to have a specific assignment designation to access that procurement channel." "What assignment?" Gerald looked at her. "The kind where the assignment itself isn't listed in any file you can reach," he said. "Rachel, where did you find this man?" "Standard application, 2 years ago." "Has he ever given you any—" "Nothing," she said. 2 years. Nothing except exactly what the job requires." Gerald was quiet again for a long moment. "That's consistent," he finally said. "That's very consistent." "With what?" He picked up his coffee cup again, looked at it. "With a particular kind of professional formation," he said. "The kind that doesn't advertise. The kind that specifically does not advertise for reasons that are built into the culture of the thing." "Gerald, I need something more specific then." "I know." He set the cup down again. "I know you do. And I'm telling you I can't give you more specific than that. What I can tell you is that the way he moved on that mat today was not combat training. Combat training produces athletic response. What he has is something different. It's—" he paused. "It's threat calibrated. Every movement he made was sized exactly to the threat level. He never exceeded what the situation required. Not once." Rachel processed that. "That's control," she said. "That's a specific kind of control," Gerald said. "The kind you build when the cost of overreaction is as high as the cost of underreaction. When you're operating in an environment where escalating unnecessarily is as dangerous as failing to respond." He looked at her directly. "You don't learn that in a training gym, Rachel. You learn that in the field. in specific kinds of field situations. Rachel was quiet. Then, he could have hurt Derek significantly. Yes. He chose not to. Multiple times. Ongoing restraint. That's not beginner's mercy. That's professional discipline. Outside the window, the afternoon was cooling toward evening. Rachel could see the training floor through the glass partition. The mats rolled back to the walls. Now, the equipment returned to its proper positions, the exhibition lights dimmed back to the standard overhead fluorescence. Caleb Warren was gone. He had left at 3:15. Because Sophie's school let out at 3:30. And the drive took 12 minutes without traffic. Rachel looked at Gerald. "What do I do with this?" she said. Gerald picked up his coffee one more time, considered it, put it back down. "I'd start," he said, "by treating him exactly the way you've been treating him. Whatever you were doing for 2 years, keep doing that. And if I need more from him." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Then you'd better need it for a very good reason," he said. "Because a man like that says no to things that most people can't say no to. And when he says yes," he paused, "you want to make sure you deserve it." Derek Vance found Caleb in the equipment storage room the following Monday afternoon. He had rehearsed this conversation. He had not, however, accounted for the particular quality of stillness with which Caleb responded to his entrance, the way he continued returning weights to their rack without adjusting his movement in any way, as if Derek's arrival was registered and simultaneously not worth interrupting the current task for. "I need to know who you are," Derek said. Caleb returned a weight to its position. "I'm the logistics and safety coordinator," he said. "We've been introduced." "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." "Then answer the question." Caleb picked up another weight, returned it, straightened. He turned and looked at Derek with the same steady, calibrated attention he brought to everything. "What happened on Saturday is done," he said. "It doesn't need to go any further." "It does for me." "Because your record—" "Because I don't know what happened on Saturday," Derek said. And there was something different in his voice now, not the edge of a man performing confidence, but the raw friction of a man whose framework has been disturbed and who doesn't have a replacement for it yet. "I've fought for 6 years. I've competed against fighters who are better trained than you are. I've competed against men who were faster and stronger and had more technical vocabulary. And I know what it feels like when someone beats me because they're better at the thing I'm doing. That's not what Saturday was." Caleb watched him. "Saturday was different," Derek said. "And I need to understand why." Silence. "Please," Derek said. It was the last word he expected to use. It sat in the air of the equipment room with the particular weight of a word deployed by someone who doesn't use it often. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "What I was trained to do," he said finally, "was not competitive." He paused. "It was never competitive. Competition assumes 2 parties with equal standing and agreed-upon rules. What I trained for was operational. The goal was never to win. The goal was to bring people home." Derek was quiet. "The difference between those 2 things," Caleb said, "is larger than most people understand until they see it directly." He picked up his clipboard from the shelf. "You're a good fighter, Derek," he said. "You have real skill. You've worked hard for it, and it's legitimate. But what you were trained to win at, and what I was trained to survive, are different problems." "What were you trained to survive?" Caleb looked at his clipboard, then at Derek. "Things I'm not going to discuss in a storage room on a Monday afternoon," he said. He moved toward the door. "Caleb." He stopped. "The watch," Derek said. "What is it?" Caleb looked down at his left wrist, at the worn military field watch with its stripped finish along the left side of the case. Something moved across his face, not grief exactly. Something older than grief. Something that had been carried so long it had become part of the landscape. "A reminder," he said. He didn't explain of what. He walked out, and Derek stood alone in the equipment room for a long time afterward, in the particular silence of a man who has received an answer that has made his question larger rather than smaller. He had no idea how much larger it was about to get. 3 days after the exhibition, Iron Ridge returned to its normal rhythm. Classes ran on schedule. The mats were cleaned and rolled. The coffee in the break room was always slightly too strong and slightly too old, and the conversation among the instructors cycled through the familiar rotation of competition results, technique debates, and whatever drama had surfaced during the weekend. But underneath that rhythm, something had shifted. Derek felt it every time he walked into a room. It wasn't that people treated him differently, not overtly, not in any way he could point to and name. His classes were still full. His students still competed hard for his attention. Rachel still included him in planning meetings. But there was something new in the way certain people paused when he entered a space. A fractional hesitation, a micro-recalibration, as if they were measuring him against something they hadn't been measuring him against before Saturday. He hated it. Not the loss itself, or not only the loss. What he hated was the shape of it. A competition loss had a clean geometry. You lost because your opponent was better trained or faster, or had a better game plan, or caught you with something you hadn't prepared for. You went back to the gym, you identified the gap, you filled it, you came back. That was the architecture of every defeat Derek had absorbed in 6 years of competition, and it was an architecture he understood completely. What had happened on Saturday had no architecture he recognized. He had attacked a man who was clearly not a competitive fighter. The stance was wrong, the guard was wrong, the footwork followed no system. Derek had a name for, and that man had made his attacks irrelevant without doing anything that could be categorized as defense. It was like trying to punch fog. The fog didn't fight back. The fog simply declined to be where your fist was. And then, in a single movement that lasted less than 2 seconds, Derek had been on the floor. He replayed it constantly. In the shower in the morning. During the warm-up portions of his classes, when his body was moving on autopilot, and his mind was free to go where it wanted. At night, in the 4 or 5 minutes between lying down and sleep arriving. He kept returning to the same detail. Caleb hadn't looked at him the way opponents look at each other. Opponents look at each other the way two men approach a door simultaneously, with the particular attention of someone calculating whether this is going to require negotiation or force. That attention is active, directed, personal. Caleb had looked at him the way a man looks at a problem that needs to be resolved efficiently, so he can get back to what he was doing before the problem interrupted him. That was what Derek couldn't get past. He wasn't a person to Caleb in that moment. How was a situation that needed to be managed? Ricky Salazar found Derek in the empty gymnasium on Thursday evening, sitting on the edge of the mat with his back against the wall and his arms resting on his knees, staring at the far wall. "You've been in here for an hour," Ricky said. "Thinking." "About Warren." Derek didn't answer immediately. Then, "He could have broken my arm." Ricky sat down beside him. "I know. The takedown, he used the entry angle, the grip placement that wasn't a sport takedown. That was a control technique. The way you'd take someone down if the goal wasn't winning a point, but ending the person's ability to resist." He paused. "He positioned it for the mat. He adjusted it at the last second so I'd land safe." Ricky was quiet. "He made that decision in real time," Derek said. "Between deciding to move and executing the move, he adjusted the entire technique to be safer for me. That's not a beginner. That's not even an advanced athlete. That's someone whose default settings include damage calibration that I don't have." "Derek, where did he come from?" Derek turned to look at Ricky directly. "I want you to ask around. Carefully. I don't want it getting back to Rachel that I'm running a background check on one of her employees. But I need to know who that man is." Ricky looked uncomfortable. "He keeps to himself," he said. "I don't think people know much. I know people don't know much. I'm asking you to find out what little exists." Derek stood. "He was in the Navy. He's got a daughter. His wife died. That's what I have. I need more than that." Ricky nodded slowly. "I'll ask around," he said. What Ricky found 3 days later amounted to almost nothing, which in itself was a kind of answer. He had spoken to Frank Dupree, who had served alongside Army Special Operations units, and knew the particular texture of men who had worked at certain levels of the military system. He had spoken to 2 other veterans on staff, whose service histories gave them pattern recognition that regular people lacked. And he had made 1 phone call to a contact at a veterans hiring nonprofit who had occasionally placed service members at facilities like Iron Ridge. What he brought back to Derek on Sunday evening was this. Caleb Warren's military record contained a service period, a rank commander, and an honorable discharge. Beyond that, the specifics had been processed through a classification protocol that the nonprofit contact described carefully as uncommon, but not unprecedented for certain operational designations. Commander, Derek said. 05, Ricky confirmed. That's senior. That's not a rank you get by being average. Navy Commander, specialized work, classified record. Derek was quiet for a moment. What kind of Navy commander ends up as a facilities coordinator at a martial arts academy? Ricky was quiet. The kind who doesn't want to be found, he finally said. That answer settled into the room between them, and neither of them touched it for a while. It was still sitting there unresolved and growing heavier when the phone call came. Thomas Riley arrived at Iron Ridge on a Tuesday. He was 61 years old, built like a man who had once been significantly more physical than he currently was, and hadn't quite arrived at the version of himself that existed without that physicality. He walked with a slight irregularity in his right hip that suggested old damage improperly healed, and he wore the particular expression of a man who has been in enough hard places that ordinary civilian environments never quite feel fully real to him. He was there on behalf of a veterans rehabilitation nonprofit, the partner organization Rachel had been negotiating with for 3 months about bringing a transition support program to Iron Ridge. The program worked with veterans experiencing re-entry difficulties, pairing them with training environments that provided structure without military hierarchy. Rachel had been cautiously optimistic about the partnership. The meeting with Thomas Riley was intended to finalize the program framework. It did not go as planned. Rachel met him in the lobby and walked him through the facility. She was mid-sentence about the academy's training schedule when Thomas Riley stopped walking. He had stopped because he had seen Caleb Warren. Caleb was moving across the training floor toward the equipment storage area, clipboard in hand, moving with his characteristic unhurried efficiency. He had not yet seen Thomas Riley. He was focused on whatever was on the clipboard. Thomas Riley had gone completely still. Not the stillness of recognition exactly. Something more complicated than that. The stillness of a man encountering something he had not prepared for and was rapidly recalibrating around. He said quietly enough that Rachel almost missed it, "Commander Warren." Caleb stopped. He turned slowly. The expression on his face when he saw Thomas Riley was not what Rachel expected. It wasn't surprise or not primarily surprise. It was something more layered, something that moved through several positions in rapid succession before settling into a controlled neutrality that looked to Rachel's eye like a man managing a significant internal response with practiced efficiency. "Doc," Caleb said. Thomas Riley walked toward him. They shook hands, not the handshake of 2 acquaintances, but the particular grip of 2 people who have been through something together that neither of them is going to describe in this lobby. "It's been a long time," Thomas said. 7 years, Caleb said. A pause. "You look good," Thomas said. "I look 40, Caleb said. And there was something in his voice, not bitterness, but the particular dry levity of men who have survived things and use humor as the acceptable language for acknowledging that survival cost something. Thomas smiled. Then the smile faded into something more serious. "You're here," he said. "You're working here." 2 years. Thomas looked around the facility. At the mats. At the championship photographs on the walls. At the equipment Derek and Ricky were working with at the far end of the floor. "This is where you landed," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a judgment. It was the careful statement of a man who is trying to understand a geography he hadn't anticipated. "Sophie's 12, Caleb said. "There's a good school district, the hours work." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "How is she?" "She's good. She's—" A small pause. A shift in Caleb's expression that lasted less than a second, but was entirely different from anything Rachel had seen on his face in 2 years of working alongside him. Something unguarded. Something that looked almost like relief just from being asked the question by someone who already knew the full context of it. "She's really good, Doc." "Good," Thomas said, and he meant it completely. Derek was watching from the far end of the floor. He had stopped what he was doing the moment Thomas Riley said those 2 words. Commander Warren, and he had not resumed. He stood with a weight in his hand that he had forgotten he was holding, watching the exchange across the length of the facility. He was too far away to hear the conversation, but he could read the body language. And what the body language told him was that the man currently talking to Caleb Warren knew him from somewhere that preceded Iron Ridge by a significant margin, and that the knowing was deep and specific and carried weight that ordinary professional acquaintance did not produce. He set the weight down. He walked toward Rachel's office. He waited outside it. When Rachel came in 20 minutes later, after finishing the logistics of Thomas Riley's program visit and walking him to his car, she found Derek sitting in the chair across from her desk, arms crossed with the expression of a man who has decided he is owed an explanation. "What do you know about him?" Derek said. Rachel sat down behind her desk. "About Caleb. Don't do the thing where you repeat the question to buy time. You've been watching him for 2 years. That man just called him Commander Warren. I want to know what you know." Rachel looked at him for a moment. "I know what I've observed," she said carefully, "which is that Caleb Warren is excellent at his job, keeps to himself, and has a daughter he takes very seriously. And before Iron Ridge, his file lists Navy service through age 32. The specifics are not accessible to me. Because they're classified." A pause. "I don't know that for certain," Rachel said. "Rachel." She looked at him directly. "I have reason to believe," she said carefully, "that Caleb held a senior operational position. The nature of that position is not something I've been able to confirm through any available channel. And I want to be clear, I'm not going to go around him to find out. If he wanted us to know, he would have told us." Derek absorbed that. "Commander is 05, he said. "Yes." "That's not a logistics coordinator." "No, it isn't." "So why is he here doing this?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "He has a daughter," she said finally. "Her mother is gone. He made a choice." Derek sat back. "That man on Saturday," he said. "That wasn't Rachel. The things he was doing were not sport. They were not athletic training. They were operational. He was managing me like a field situation. Every response he made was calibrated to the minimum necessary force. I've competed against men who were technically superior to me. I know what that feels like. Saturday wasn't that." Rachel didn't answer. "Saturday," Derek said, "felt like the difference between a chess player and someone who has played a different game entirely and is visiting the chess table as a courtesy." A long silence settled over the office. Then Rachel said quietly, "Gerald Hutchins told me something similar. He served with Marines who had worked alongside personnel from certain Naval Special Operations units. He said he recognized the movement." Derek went very still. "What specifically did he say?" Rachel looked at her desk, at her hands, then back at Derek. "He said Caleb's responses were threat calibrated, that every movement was sized exactly to the level of the situation and never exceeded it." "That's SEAL training," Derek said. Rachel said nothing. "That's specifically SEAL training," Derek said. "The calibration principle, minimum necessary force with maximum efficiency. That's a specific tactical philosophy that comes from a specific community." He paused. "He was a SEAL." Rachel maintained her careful neutrality. "I can't confirm. He was a SEAL," Derek said. "And not basic program, not entry level. He was a commander, senior officer, in a classified unit. He stood. I mocked that man, in front of 200 people. I threw gloves at his chest and told him he wouldn't last 10 seconds and he stopped. He sat back down. He looked at the floor. He let me," Derek said quietly. "That's the part I can't get over. He let me do it. He had every reason, he could have ended it a dozen different ways before it got to the mat." He could have told me who he was. He could have declined with information that would have made declining look completely reasonable. He had the tools to shut me down completely without setting foot on that mat. And he didn't, Rachel said. He didn't. A long pause. Why? Rachel looked at him. I think, she said slowly, that's a question you should ask him. Derek found Caleb in the parking lot that afternoon, leaning against his truck in the 3:15 light waiting. Sophie arrived at 3:28, a 12-year-old with dark hair and a backpack that looked slightly too large for her frame, who walked up to Caleb with the easy physical familiarity of a child who has always been comfortable with her parent, and said something Derek couldn't hear from where he stood. Caleb's face when Sophie arrived was an entirely different face from any version Derek had seen inside the building. It wasn't the controlled neutrality. It wasn't the patient stillness. It was something undefended. Something that looked like the place where all the calibration and restraint and professional discipline stored itself when it wasn't needed. A drawer opened and temporarily emptied, and what remained underneath was just a father relieved that the school day was over and his daughter was standing in front of him. Derek watched them for a moment. Then he turned around and went back inside. He sat in the empty gymnasium for 40 minutes. When he came out, Frank Dupree was locking up the far equipment room. Derek walked over to him and said without preamble, "What do you know about SEAL Team Trident?" Frank turned around slowly. He looked at Derek for a long moment. "Where did you hear that name?" "I didn't. I'm guessing. Based on what I know about Caleb's rank, his classification level, his operational profile." Derek paused. "Am I right?" Frank studied him. "I've heard the name," Frank said carefully. "I served alongside elements from Naval Special Warfare on 2 deployments. Trident came up. Peripherally." He paused. "They were search and rescue. High-risk personnel recovery. The kind of missions where the target is already in hostile hands and the window is hours, not days." Derek was very still. "What happened to them?" he said. Frank looked at him for a long time. "I don't know specifics," he said. "What I heard, and this was years ago, and secondhand, is that there was a mission. Somewhere that doesn't get named. A recovery operation that went wrong at the extraction point." He paused. "One operator didn't come home." The gymnasium was very quiet. "And Caleb was the commanding officer," Derek said. Frank didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He simply looked at Derek with the particular expression of a man who has said everything he's going to say on a subject. Derek walked away from that conversation, with the weight of it settling into him slowly, the way cold water finds its way through clothing, not all at once, but gradually and completely. He had mocked a man who had carried home his team's dead. He had thrown gloves at a man who had spent years going into situations where the difference between coming back and not coming back was measured in decisions made in seconds. He had called that man a coward in front of 200 people, and that man had said nothing, had absorbed it, had stood there with his clipboard and his old watch and his 3:15 departure time, and had said nothing, because he had made a promise. No more missions, no more glory, no more risking himself when Sophie needed him to come home. Derek understood for the first time that what he had interpreted as cowardice was the most disciplined thing he had ever witnessed. It was the restraint of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of and had consciously chosen not to deploy it. Not because he was afraid, because he had something more important to protect. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon. Iron Ridge had been selected to host the National Emergency Response Competition, a 3-day event drawing nearly 200 participants from across the country. Veterans, first responders, corporate emergency management teams, rescue instructors and search and rescue coordinators and medical triage specialists. Rachel made the announcement with the particular controlled enthusiasm of someone who understood that the professional opportunity was significant and the logistical requirements were enormous. The event was scheduled for 6 weeks out. The training site was a remote mountain facility 40 minutes from the academy, a property Iron Ridge used for outdoor simulation exercises, rough terrain courses, and multi-day leadership development programs. Caleb's first task was a full safety and logistics assessment of the site. He drove up on a Saturday morning in the second week of November alone, with a notebook and a radio, and the systematic attention that he brought to every professional task. He was there for 4 hours. He came back with 17 pages of notes. He scheduled a meeting with Rachel for Monday morning and laid the notes on her desk and walked her through them with the steady, organized specificity of someone who had been assessing operational environments since before Iron Ridge existed. Several items were routine: equipment maintenance requirements, trail marker updates, generator fuel scheduling, first aid station placement. But there were 5 items that were not routine. The emergency communication grid had 3 dead zones that didn't appear on the facility's technical documentation areas, where the radio repeater coverage failed completely, leaving zones of total communication blackout. 4 evacuation markers had been physically relocated since the last inspection 18 months earlier. They had been moved in a direction that shortened the apparent route to the primary evacuation assembly point, but actually directed anyone following them toward a section of the canyon terrain that was geologically unstable. The backup generator had been serviced 8 weeks earlier by a contractor whose work order documentation was incomplete. The generator itself had been fitted with a fuel intake component that was not compatible with the generator's specifications. Not catastrophically wrong, but wrong enough that under sustained high load, it would likely fail within 6 to 8 hours. A secondary access road designated as closed had fresh tire tracks on it, recent enough that the mud displacement pattern hadn't fully settled. And one of the permanent equipment caches, a locked steel box containing emergency signaling equipment and medical supplies, had been opened and resealed. The seal was intact, but the padlock had been scratched in a specific pattern that Caleb recognized as the result of forced entry followed by relocking. Rachel listened to all of this without interrupting. When Caleb finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Could any of this be accidental?" she said. "The communication dead zones are structural, probably always existed and weren't properly documented. Possible." He paused. "The marker relocation is either negligence or deliberate. The generator component is either incompetence or deliberate. The access road and the cache, those are not accidental. Someone has been inside the restricted zone. Recently, multiple visits based on the track patterns." Rachel looked at her desk. "What are you recommending?" "Enhanced access monitoring on the restricted approaches, a full equipment audit before the event, replacement of the non-compatible generator component, restoration of the evacuation markers to their correct positions, and physical verification of the route." He paused. "And a communication protocol for the event that accounts for the dead zone's manual relay points with personnel assigned specifically to those positions." "That's significant added personnel." "Yes." A pause. "Do you want to bring in outside security assessment?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I'd recommend addressing the mechanical and structural issues immediately," he said. "The access monitoring I can implement. For the event itself." Another pause. "Let me get through the audit first." Rachel nodded slowly. "Is this connected to the competition itself?" she said. "Could someone be trying to compromise the event? I don't know. It could be unrelated, unauthorized access equipment, contractor errors, trail maintenance decisions made without authorization. It could be coincidence." He paused. "But I don't operate on coincidence." Rachel looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "I imagine you don't." Derek heard about the site assessment findings, the way most things traveled at Iron Ridge imperfectly, and in fragments assembled from pieces of overheard conversation and second-hand reporting. What he received was enough to confirm that Caleb had identified serious problems with the event site and had brought them to Rachel with a specificity and systematic completeness that the contracted event management firm had entirely missed. He went to find Caleb. He found him in the equipment room again. His territory, the place where he moved with the particular ownership of a man who has defined this space as his professional domain and organized it accordingly. "I heard about the site assessment," Derek said. Caleb looked up briefly, returned to what he was doing. "What exactly did you hear?" "That you found problems, significant ones." "Some concerns, yes. The marker relocation," Derek said. The generator, the unauthorized access. He paused. That's not a maintenance checklist. That's a threat assessment. Caleb set down what he was holding. He turned and looked at Derek with the steady, evaluating attention that Derek was beginning to understand was not dismissal, but something closer to the opposite. The full engagement of a man calibrating exactly how much of the relevant information the current situation required him to share. "You're not wrong," Caleb said. "Is the event safe?" "Not yet. It will be if we address the identified items correctly." "And if something gets missed?" Caleb looked at him. "That's why you don't miss things," he said. Derek was quiet for a moment. "I've been asking about you," he said. "I want you to know that. I haven't found much. Your record is locked down. But I've found enough to understand that the things I said to you, Derek, were significantly Derek." Caleb's voice was level and not unkind, but it stopped the sentence completely. "What you said doesn't require a formal apology from this side of the conversation. You were operating on what you could see, which was a middle-aged man with a clipboard telling you how to do your job. I was wrong, yes, but you're not the first person to make that mistake, and you won't be the last. The mistake isn't the problem." He held Derek's gaze. "What matters is whether you learn from it quickly enough to be useful when it counts." Derek absorbed that. He said, "Is something going to happen at this event?" Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I hope not. I'm working to make sure not." He paused. "But there are 200 people coming to that site. Veterans, first responders, families." He picked up his clipboard. "So I'm going to make sure the systems are right, every one of them." He moved toward the door. Derek said, "What can I do?" Caleb stopped. He turned back slowly. He looked at Derek. Really looked at him, the way Derek was beginning to understand that Caleb looked at things he was taking seriously, and said with a quiet directness that felt nothing like condescension, "Right now, be the best instructor in your classes this week. Your students train harder when you're fully present, and I need this facility operating at full capacity for the next 6 weeks." Derek stared at him. "That's it. That's what's needed right now." Caleb walked out, and Derek stood in the equipment room for a long moment, absorbing the particular quality of being given a real answer to a sincere question by someone who had absolutely no obligation to give him anything. Then he went to teach his afternoon class, and he taught it with a focus and presence that his students noticed immediately without understanding why it had arrived. 2 weeks out from the event, the site audit was complete. Most of the mechanical issues had been corrected. The marker routes had been restored and physically verified. The generator had been properly serviced. The communication dead zones had been mapped and manual relay positions designated. The unauthorized access remained unexplained. Caleb had reported it to Rachel, who had reported it to the property management company, who had attributed it to an unlogged maintenance contractor visit and closed the inquiry. Caleb had made a note. He had not been satisfied. But the event was 6 days out. 200 people were confirmed, sponsors had committed, and Rachel needed everything ready. He drove back to San Diego in the early evening, the last light fading behind the ridgeline, his phone showing one unread message from Sophie about a school project she needed help with. He texted back, "Be home by 6. We'll work on it." He drove south with the window down and the November air coming in cold and clean, and he let himself believe for the length of that drive that he had caught everything. He had not caught everything. He would know that in 6 days. The morning of the competition arrived clear and cold, the kind of November day in the San Diego mountains that starts with frost on the windshields and a sky so blue it looks painted. 193 participants had checked in by 7:15. Veterans, first responders, corporate emergency management teams, search and rescue coordinators from 6 different states, medical triage specialists with more combined field hours than most hospital systems. People who did hard things for a living and had come here to prove it under controlled conditions. Caleb had been on site since 5:30. He had walked the primary evacuation routes twice before sunrise. He had checked each communication relay position personally, confirming that the personnel assigned to the dead zone coverage were in place and had working radios. He had verified the generator fuel levels, the first aid station inventory, the emergency vehicle access points, and the weather forecast, which that morning showed a fast-moving system building over the inland ranges, arrival time estimated at 4 in the afternoon, well after the first day's exercises were scheduled to conclude. He had noted the estimated arrival time. He had noted the word estimated. He had added 2 hours of buffer to his internal planning and said nothing to anyone about it because the buffer was his, and he didn't need anyone else carrying it yet. By 7:45, the opening ceremony was underway. Rachel stood at the front of the assembly area and spoke with the particular precise warmth of someone who had prepared remarks and also genuinely meant them. The participants listened with the attentiveness of people who took competitions seriously. Derek stood at the edge of the assembled group in his Iron Ridge instructor jacket, arms crossed, doing what Caleb had asked him to do. Being present, being professional, being fully there. He had been doing exactly that for 6 days. Caleb watched from the operations room, a converted equipment structure with radio contact topographic maps and the event communication system laid out across 2 folding tables. He watched the opening ceremony through the window. He watched the weather to the northwest. He watched his watch. 7:52 in the morning. The exercises began. For the first 3 hours, everything ran according to plan. The first scenario. A simulated industrial accident with multiple casualties, requiring triage extraction and evacuation, produced the focused, controlled chaos it was designed to produce. Teams moved through the terrain with the practiced intensity of people who train for this specifically. Communication chatter filled the radio channels with the efficient shorthand of professionals doing their jobs. The relay personnel in the dead zones were working correctly, passing traffic manually between the coverage gaps. Caleb monitored it all from the operations room and said very little. Rachel stopped in at 10:15. "How's it looking?" "Clean so far," he said. "Weather's moving faster than forecast. I'd put revised arrival at 2:30, maybe 2 o'clock. Rachel looked at the northwest sky through the window. "That's 2 hours early." "Yes." "Do we need to adjust the schedule?" "Not yet, but I want authorization to call an early consolidation if I see conditions deteriorating faster than current projection." Rachel looked at him. "You have it." She left. Caleb picked up his radio and made a quiet call to the relay personnel, giving them a weather update and telling them to report immediately if they lost contact with any team. 10:47 in the morning. The second scenario was underway, a wilderness search and rescue simulation involving a mock missing person event and a terrain navigation component. 4 teams were deployed across the eastern quadrant of the site. 2 teams were working the canyon approach. One team, including a volunteer paramedic named Maya Vance, Derek's younger sister, 27 years old there, with a first responder group from Los Angeles, was assigned the Southern Ridge route. Caleb knew Maya was on site. Derek had mentioned it the previous week with the kind of careful casualness that meant he was monitoring it and didn't want to appear to be monitoring it. Caleb had noted it the way he noted everything. He had not made it a priority because Maya's group had an experienced team lead, and the Southern Ridge route was one of the simpler terrain assignments. He would remember that assessment later. He would remember it with the specific clarity of a mistake made in good faith that cost something real. 11:23 in the morning. The weather changed, not gradually. The system that had been forecast to arrive at 4 o'clock had encountered warmer air coming off the inland valleys and accelerated dramatically. The leading edge hit the ridgeline at 11:23 with the abruptness of a door-slamming wind. First, then cloud cover dropping, then temperature falling 8 degrees in 12 minutes. Caleb was on the radio before the temperature gauge finished its drop. "All teams, this is operations. Weather is accelerating significantly ahead of forecast. Current conditions are degrading. All teams confirm position and status." The responses came in. Most of them, not all of them. Team 7, deployed in the northern sector, reported in 30 seconds late because their relay personnel had needed to reposition when the wind hit. Team 4, working the canyon approach, reported static on the channel before their message came through. Team 9 Maya's group on the southern ridge did not respond. Caleb waited 15 seconds. Called again. Waited. Nothing. He picked up the direct channel to the southern ridge relay position. Southern Relay, this is Operation. Do you have contact with Team 9? A pause. Then, Operations Southern Relay. Negative contact with Team 9. Last known position was the lower marker junction. That was a pause. 18 minutes ago. Caleb looked at the topographic map. The lower marker junction on the southern ridge route was exactly where 4 of the relocated evacuation markers had been before he corrected them. He had confirmed the correction himself. He had walked that route personally and verified the new marker placement with his own eyes. But the markers had been corrected based on the original documentation. And the original documentation had last been verified 18 months ago. Operations, do you want us to move toward Team 9's last known? The relay operator asked. Negative, Caleb said. Hold position. Maintain your relay function. He pulled the topographic map closer and looked at the canyon section south of the lower marker junction. At the geological survey notation he had seen in the site documentation and flagged as a concern in his audit. At the section of terrain marked with a stability advisory that had been classified as low risk based on dry season assessment. It was not the dry season. 2 weeks of late fall rain had soaked the eastern slope. He had noted it. He had assessed it as manageable. He had been wrong about what manageable meant when a fast-moving weather system added wind load to already saturated terrain. He picked up the radio. All teams, this is Operations. We are transitioning from exercise to real-world emergency response. I repeat, this is not a simulation. All teams consolidate to primary assembly point via safest available route. Do not use canyon approaches. Southern Ridge teams confirm position immediately. The radio traffic changed immediately. The controlled professional chatter of a simulation gave way to the different sharper energy of people recalibrating from exercise to actual emergency. 11:31 in the morning. Derek came through the operations room door 40 seconds after the announcement. He had been running from the northern assembly point, and his face said he already knew. Maya's team is not responding, he said. Correct. Where are they? Last confirmed position puts them south of the lower junction. Somewhere in the approach to the secondary canyon section. Caleb was already pulling gear from the storage cabinet radio first aid pack, emergency signaling kit. I'm going out. I'm coming. Derek, she's my sister. His voice was completely flat. The performance, the ego, the constructed confidence, all of it gone. What remained was just a man and the specific terror of someone he loved being somewhere unknown in deteriorating conditions. I'm coming. Caleb looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then keep up, he said. They went out the door at 11:33. The wind hit them immediately. Not the San Diego coastal wind that Derek knew from mornings on the beach, but mountain wind in November with rain behind it, the kind that leans into you with a physical weight and makes every exposed surface feel wrong. Derek had trained for physical hardship in gyms and on competition mats. This was a different register of hardship. The terrain did not respond to athletic conditioning the way a mat did. It had its own logic. Caleb moved through it like he was familiar with that logic. Not fast, not recklessly. He moved with a deliberate ground-eating efficiency that covered distance without wasting energy, picking lines through the terrain with the practiced eye of someone for whom terrain navigation was not a sport discipline, but a survival skill built over years in places that were less forgiving than this. Derek stayed close. He didn't try to push the pace. Something about the way Caleb moved told him that pushing the pace here would be a mistake. What happened to the markers? Derek asked as they moved. I corrected the relocated markers, Caleb said without breaking stride. But I corrected them based on the documentation. If the documentation itself had an error, if the original placement was wrong before the relocation. He paused, navigating a scramble over loose rock with 3 quick movements. Then correcting back to the original position may have restored the error. Derek processed that while climbing. So we don't know exactly where they went. We know their last confirmed position, and we know the documentation-based route. We look for divergence from that route. 11:49 in the morning. They found the first marker. It was in the correct position, Caleb's corrected position. He crouched beside it and looked at the ground around it. Soft earth, recent boot prints, multiple sets moving south. They followed this one, he said. Good. Depends on what the next one shows. The next one was 200 meters south along the ridgeline, and when they found it, Caleb went still. He crouched beside it for a long moment. Talk to me, Derek said. The marker is in my corrected position, Caleb said. But the prints here diverge. The majority went south-southeast. He looked at the terrain south-southeast. Then at the topographic map he had folded into his jacket pocket. Then at the terrain again. There's a shortcut visible from this point. Not marked, not authorized, but visually, it looks like the faster route to the assembly point. Would they take it? Depends on their team lead's experience level. A team lead who knows this terrain, no. A team lead who is navigating by visual landmarks under time pressure in a simulation context. They took it, Derek said. Caleb stood. He was already moving south-southeast. The shortcut crosses the secondary canyon section, he said as he moved. The one the geological survey flagged as low stability in wet conditions. Derek moved with him. How bad is low stability? In these conditions with this wind load on saturated slope. A pause. Bad enough that I wouldn't cross it the way they're crossing it. They moved faster. 12:13 in the afternoon. They heard voices before they saw anyone. Then they came around a rock formation and saw Maya's group, 7 people clustered near the edge of a footbridge spanning the narrowest point of the secondary canyon. The bridge was a permanent structure, cable-supported, rated for the facility. It was also currently vibrating in the wind with a movement that Caleb recognized immediately as wrong. Maya was at the front of the group. She had her radio up and was trying the channel for the 3rd time in a row. Her team lead, a heavy-set man in his 40s named Crawford, was gesturing toward the bridge with the particular decisiveness of someone who has made a decision and is not fully comfortable with it. We cross here, Crawford was saying. It's faster and the bridge is rated. It's moving, one of the group members said. Wind does that. The rating accounts for wind. Caleb covered the remaining distance at a near run. Stop, he said. Not loudly. With the quality of a single word deployed at exactly the volume needed to be heard clearly and carry the weight of someone who is not suggesting. Everyone stopped. Crawford turned. Who are the operations coordinator? Do not cross that bridge. Caleb moved to the bridge edge and crouched looking at the anchor points on the near side. He put his hand on the primary cable. He felt it. A vibration that was not wind load. He looked at the far anchor point. The anchor plate on the far side had pulled from the mounting surface. Not completely, it was still attached, still functional, in normal conditions. But the gap between the plate and the rock surface was visible from 20 feet away, and in current conditions, with 7 people loading the span, that gap was going to become a failure point within the first crossing. He stood. The far anchor is compromised, he said. We don't cross here. Crawford stared at way. And in current conditions, with 7 people loading the span, that gap was going to become a failure point within the first crossing. He stood. The far anchor is compromised, he said. We don't cross here. Crawford stared at him. The maintenance records show this bridge was... The maintenance records are 18 months old and the anchor has moved. I can see it from here. Caleb looked at the group, counted faces. 7 people, all ambulatory, varying levels of physical condition. He looked at Maya. She was looking back at him with the direct assessment-ready attention of a trained paramedic who had been in enough field situations to recognize when someone knows what they're doing. Are you Maya Vance? She blinked. Yes. Your brother sent me. Something moved across her face. Relief complicated by the specific pride of someone who doesn't want to need rescuing. He didn't need to. He needed to. Caleb said simply. You have any injuries in this group? Morris twisted his ankle on the descent. He's mobile but slow. Caleb looked at Morris, a compact man in his 30s, holding his right ankle carefully. Can you make 300 meters of uneven terrain? Yeah, good. Caleb pulled the topographic map. There's a secondary crossing point 300 meters north-northwest. It's a rock ford waters up from the rain, but it's manageable at this flow level. We go that way. That's out of the way, Crawford said. Caleb looked at him. 1 second of direct eye contact. Crawford said nothing more. Derek had been watching Caleb work through this. Watching him assess the bridge, make the call, read the group, identify the injured member, pull the map, propose the route, all of it in under 90 seconds, with a smooth, sequential efficiency that looked less like decision-making and more like a machine running a program it had run many times before. He had competed against men who were technically superior to him. He had trained for years to be faster, stronger, more capable than the people across from him on a mat. He understood now, watching Caleb in this terrain with these stakes, that he had been measuring the wrong things. 12:27 in the afternoon. They were moving toward the secondary ford when the slope above them let go. Not dramatically. Not a movie landslide with a roaring wall of debris. A section of saturated hide, approximately 40 meters wide, released with a low grinding sound and began moving downslope at a speed that was fast enough to require immediate response and not fast enough to be impossible to avoid. Caleb heard it first. He was already turning and pointing before anyone else registered the sound. Uphill and right. Move. Now. I was not shouting. His voice had the quality of a sound that cuts through other sounds not by volume, but by frequency. The particular register that trained people respond to automatically. Everyone moved. Crawford went uphill and left, which was wrong, but he was out of the primary path, and that was what mattered. Morris, with his bad ankle, stumbled. Derek caught him. He got under Morris's arm without hesitating, and took his weight and moved uphill and right with him at a pace that cost Derek significantly, in terms of his own footing, but kept Morris moving. The slope material moved through the area they had been standing in 30 seconds ago. It took 6 seconds. Then it was past. Everyone stood on solid ground, breathing hard. The silence afterward had the particular quality of silence that arrives when a loud thing stops. Complete. Ringing. Maya looked at Caleb. You heard that before it happened, she said. Sound changes when saturated material starts to move, he said. You learn to listen for it. Where do you learn that? He looked at her. Places I'm not going to describe on a mountainside, he said. Let's keep moving. 12:44 in the afternoon. The secondary ford was navigable barely. The water was knee-deep at the crossing point and moving with the force of 2 weeks of accumulated runoff, and crossing it required the group to link arms and move slowly against the current. Caleb went first, checking footing, then stationed himself on the far side and took each person's arm as they crossed. Morris crossed last, supported by Derek on one side and Caleb's grip on the other. When all 7 group members were across, Caleb stood in the water for a moment, with his hands on his knees. Derek watched him. It was a small thing. 3 seconds at most. Caleb straightening up, looking back across the water at the terrain they had come through, with an expression that Derek couldn't fully read from where he stood. Something between relief and a deeper reckoning that had nothing to do with the current situation, and everything to do with a situation 7 years old. Then Caleb straightened completely and picked up his radio. Operations, this is Warren. Team 9 is accounted for. 7 personnel, 1 minor injury mobile. We are proceeding to primary assembly via the North Ridge approach. ETA approximately 40 minutes. Confirm receipt. The radio crackled. Rachel's voice came through with the controlled relief of someone who has been managing fear very quietly. Confirmed. All other teams are consolidated. You are the last group outstanding. 40 minutes. Copy that. He put the radio away. He looked at the group. 40 minutes, he said. Let's go. 1:17 in the afternoon. They were 20 minutes out from the assembly point when Derek pulled up beside Caleb on the trail. They walked in silence for a moment. The anchor, Derek said. The bridge anchor. What about it? Was that part of what you found in the pre-event assessment? Caleb was quiet for a moment. The bridge wasn't flagged in my audit, he said. It's a permanent structure with a maintenance record. I inspected the anchor points visually from the surface. The plate separation would have required a close physical inspection of the underside to detect. So you missed it. I missed it. He said it without defensiveness and without self-punishment. Just a clean, factual statement. But you caught it when it mattered. Yes. That's the difference, Derek said. Isn't it between training for the test and training for what happens when the test becomes real? Caleb looked at him briefly. Something like that. I've been training for tests, Derek said. My whole career. Every competition, every bout, every exhibition, I was preparing to pass a test. To demonstrate that I'm the best version of a specific thing in a controlled environment. Caleb said nothing. He was listening. Today was not a test, Derek said. No. And I caught Morris. When the slope came, I caught him, and I moved, and I didn't think about it. A pause. I didn't think about whether it was impressive. I didn't think about who was watching. I just did it. Yes, Caleb said. Is that? Derek paused, searched for the right framing. Is that what it always feels like when the situation is real? Caleb was quiet for a while. When it's real, he said finally, you stop being aware of yourself. You just become the response. A pause. The training disappears, and what's left is either enough or it isn't. What if it isn't? Caleb was quiet for longer this time. Then you carry that, he said, for as long as you live. The weight of that answer sat between them for the rest of the walk. Derek did not push further. He understood without being told directly that the answer had just described something specific. Something that had happened to Caleb in a place that didn't get named in a situation where what was left had not been quite enough to bring everyone home. 1:38 in the afternoon. They came into the primary assembly area. 193 people, all accounted for. The operations staff had done their work. Rachel had maintained communication and coordination with the precision that Caleb had seen in her from the first month he worked at Iron Ridge, and had quietly filed under this person is better at her job than her job title suggests. The weather had continued deteriorating. Rain now steady and cold with wind driving it horizontally across the assembly area. Tents had been erected. Hot drinks were being distributed. The medical station had handled 6 minor injuries. When Caleb's group walked in, a small but distinct change moved through the crowd. Not applause. These were professionals, and professionals don't applaud each other for doing what the situation required. But a change in the attention field. People noticing. People making room. Maya walked straight to Rachel and gave a brief, precise account of what had happened with the bridge and the slope and the ford crossing. Professional. Factual. Accurate. Rachel listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, Rachel said, "Who made the call on the bridge?" Maya looked across the assembly area to where Caleb was standing at the edge of the medical station, talking quietly to Doc Riley, who had set up triage there 3 hours ago and had been running it with the efficiency of a man who had done exactly this in significantly worse conditions. "Him," Maya said. Rachel nodded once. She did not go to Caleb immediately. She had a facility full of people to manage and a weather situation that required her full attention for another 2 hours. She would find him later. But she watched him. She watched him move through the assembly area with the same systematic attention he brought to everything. Checking in with the relay personnel, verifying the medical situation. Talking briefly to the event security team about the access road they needed to monitor. Moving from task to task with a quiet completeness that ensured nothing was missed and no one would have been able to point at any specific moment and say, that is where the leadership was. Because that was the point. The leadership was everywhere and visible to no one. It was in the relay personnel being where they needed to be. In the dead zones being covered. In the evacuation routes being correct, except for one bridge anchor on a permanent structure that an 18-month-old maintenance record couldn't have anticipated. In a group of 7 people standing in an assembly area in the rain instead of at the bottom of a canyon. 2:12 in the afternoon. The weather hit full force, and 2 things happened simultaneously that nobody had predicted and that changed everything. The first lightning struck the main ridgeline above the facility, and the strike traveled through the rock substrate to the primary electrical junction, and the power went out. Completely. Including the backup generator, which ran for 90 seconds before the incompatible fuel intake component. The one Caleb had flagged in his audit, the one that had been replaced before the event, or that was supposed to have been replaced before the event failed under the surge load. The facility went dark. The second the access road, the one with the unexplained fresh tire tracks, the one that had been flagged as a concern in Caleb's assessment, the one that the property management company had attributed to an unlogged contractor visit, collapsed under the combined weight of the storm runoff and the geological instability that no one had formally assessed, because no one had formally assessed the access road in 3 years. Both ways out were now compromised. Rachel came through the operations room door with a radio in one hand and her phone in the other, and she looked at Caleb with the expression of someone who has just received 2 pieces of information that individually are manageable and together are something else. "Tell me," Caleb said. She told him. The room went quiet. Derek was there. Doc Riley was there. 3 event coordinators were there. Several team leads who had gathered for the post-exercise debrief were there. Everyone looked at Caleb, not at Rachel, not at Derek, not at the most decorated person in the room, or the strongest person in the room, or the person with the most impressive title. At the man who had been standing at the back of every room for 2 years, repairing equipment and leaving at 3:15. Caleb looked at the topographic map. He was quiet for 15 seconds. Not the paralyzed quiet of someone overwhelmed. The focused quiet of someone running through a sequence of variables and arriving at the end of it with a course of action. He looked up. "Rachel," he said, "communications. You're running this channel. Everyone talks through you. Nothing goes out without your clearance." He looked at Doc Riley. "Doc, medical triage continues. Prioritize mobility assessment. I need to know within 30 minutes who can move and who needs support." He looked at the event coordinators. "You 3. Equipment inventory. Every piece of emergency gear on this site, I need a full list in 20 minutes. He looked at Derek. Derek was already looking at him. "Derek," Caleb said, "I need 12 physically capable volunteers. They carry supplies to the south staging area." He paused. "And they bring back everyone who can't make the primary route independently." Derek nodded immediately. 12 people. South staging. Got it." He moved toward the door. Caleb said, "Derek." He stopped. "Your job isn't to prove you're brave out there," Caleb said. "Your job is to bring 12 people back." Derek looked at him for 1 second. Then he walked out the door. And Caleb Warren, who had spent 7 years telling himself he was done with this, picked up the radio and began doing the only thing he had ever been genuinely formed to do. He brought people home. 2:17 in the afternoon. The operations room had become something different from what it was an hour ago. An hour ago, it was a coordination center for a professional competition. Now it was the nerve center of a genuine emergency. And the difference between those 2 things was not administrative. It was visceral. You felt it in the air pressure of the room, in the way people moved, in the specific quality of silence between radio transmissions. Rachel was at the communication table with both hands on the equipment, working 3 channels simultaneously, with the focused precision of someone who has found the version of herself that the situation requires and is not going to deviate from it. She had been doing this for 20 minutes, and she had not made a single error. Doc Riley had moved his medical operation to the larger tent adjacent to the operations room. He had 4 people assisting him, and he was running triage with the systematic efficiency of a man who had done exactly this in places where the resources were significantly worse and the stakes significantly higher. In 30 minutes, he would deliver his mobility assessment to Caleb. He was going to deliver it in 22. The 3 event coordinators were moving through the facility with clipboards, taking inventory of every piece of emergency equipment on site: ropes, signaling devices, emergency blankets, medical supplies, lighting water. They were going to report back in 20 minutes. They reported back in 17. Caleb stood at the topographic map and absorbed each piece of information as it arrived, filing it into a framework that was building in his mind, with the particular speed of someone whose operational formation had trained him to construct situational pictures from incomplete data under time pressure. It was a skill that looked from the outside like calm. From the inside, it was the opposite of calm. It was rapid, demanding, relentless processing, but it was controlled, and control was what the room needed. 2:29 in the afternoon. Derek came back through the door. He had 12 people with him, a mix of physically capable competition participants and Iron Ridge staff ranging in age from 23 to 51. He had assembled them in 7 minutes, briefed them in 2, and returned in time to hear Caleb's updated assessment. South staging status, Caleb asked without looking up from the map. Clear route to the south staging point, approximately half a mile. Terrain is wet, but navigable. Crawford's team is staged there, 9 people too, with minor mobility issues. I can get supplies to them and bring them back inside 90 minutes. Caleb looked up. 90 minutes puts you out in the field when the storm peaks. I know. The canyon section south of the staging area is... I know, Derek said. I'm not going into the canyon. I'm going to the staging point, loading up people and coming back. Straight line both ways. Caleb looked at him for 2 full seconds. Take the emergency rope kit from the inventory. And 2 radios, primary and backup. Check in with Rachel every 15 minutes. Copy? Derek. Caleb held his gaze. 15 minutes, not 20, not when you remember. Every 15 minutes. Got it. I went out the door again with his 12 people behind him, and Caleb watched them go with the particular quality of attention a commander gives to people moving into risk, complete, unblinking, and then deliberately released because you cannot function if you're tracking everyone simultaneously in your emotional register. You file them. You trust your preparation. You keep moving. 2:31 in the afternoon. Rachel said, I have contact with county emergency services. They're aware of the situation. Primary road access is compromised, but they have an alternate route assessment underway. Estimated response window is 3 to 4 hours. 3 to 4 hours. Caleb looked at the facility population count on the board beside the map. 193 participants. 17 Iron Ridge staff. 4 event contractors. 214 people total on a site with compromised power, a collapsed primary access road, and a weather system that was currently at peak intensity and would remain there for another 2 to 3 hours before beginning to moderate. The math was straightforward. 3 to 4 hours until external assistance. 2 to 3 hours until conditions improved enough to make that assistance fully effective. 100% of the people on this site needed to be accounted for warm, medically stable, and able to move under their own power or with assistance before that window opened. He looked at the inventory list. Emergency lighting, adequate for the main structures. Heating 2 propane units in the main tent, sufficient for the current occupancy. Water good. Medical doc had what he needed for the injuries already presenting. Food, not a current priority, but would become one if the timeline extended. The power situation was the variable he kept returning to. The primary generator had failed. The backup fuel component failure that he had flagged in his audit that had been corrected before the event. He had confirmed the replacement work order was completed. He had not verified the replacement physically. He should have verified it physically. Rachel, he said. Yeah. The backup generator. The fuel component replacement. Do you have the contractor sign-off? Rachel reached for the event documentation folder without breaking her radio rhythm. She flipped through it with one hand. Found the page. She held it up without looking away from her radio equipment. Caleb crossed to her and read it. The work order was dated. Signed. The replacement was documented as completed. But the component part number listed on the work order was the same part number as the original incorrect component. Caleb stared at the paper for 3 seconds. The replacement had been completed. The wrong component had been replaced with an identical wrong component. He set the paper down. He walked to the door, opened it, looked at the rain and said nothing for a moment. Then he closed the door, walked back to the map, and began working the problem from a different angle. 2:47 in the afternoon. Doc Riley came through the door. Mobility assessment, he said. He put a handwritten page on the table beside the map. 189 mobile under own power, 25 mobile with support, 3 that need carry assist if we move. Nobody critical yet. Anderson has a prior cardiac history, and I want to watch him. Stress plus cold is not what I'd prescribe. Caleb looked at the page, then at Doc. How's Anderson managing it? He's stable. He's been stable for 40 minutes. He's also 64, and he's been in worse situations than this, which is helping him emotionally, and is doing absolutely nothing for his coronary arteries. Can he stay warm where he is? If we keep the propane units running and he stays off his feet, yes. Then he stays put. Agreed. Doc started to leave, then stopped. Caleb. Caleb looked at him. Doc Riley had a particular way of looking at Caleb that was different from how anyone else at Iron Ridge looked at him. It was the look of a man who knew the version of Caleb that existed before Sophie and before Emily's accident and before the decision to stop, who had been present for the operational history that Iron Ridge only glimpsed in fragments. The look contained something complicated. Pride, maybe. Concern, definitely. You doing okay with this? Doc said. The question was small. The weight behind it was not. I'm fine, Caleb said. That's not what I asked. A pause. I'm doing what needs doing, Caleb said. That's enough. Doc nodded once. He understood the distinction. He left. 2:53 in the afternoon. Derek's first radio check-in came in at exactly 15 minutes. Operations, this is the South team. We are at the staging point. All 9 personnel accounted for. Loading now. Morris's ankle is worse. He's going to need a carry assist for the return. Requesting confirmation en route. Rachel looked at Caleb. Confirm north return route, Caleb said. Avoid the creek crossing by the Oak Stand water level has come up. Add 40 meters west of your current bearing and you'll have cleaner ground. Rachel relayed it. Derek's acknowledgement came back clean and immediate. Caleb put a small mark on the map indicating Derek's position and returned to the power situation. He had been turning it over since he found the wrong component on the work order. The backup generator was effectively non-functional for sustained operation. The primary system was down due to the lightning strike. The emergency lighting was battery-backed and would run for approximately 6 hours, which was adequate. But there were medical equipment needs. Doc's monitoring devices for Anderson primarily that required stable power. There was a third option. The site had a small solar plus battery installation that had been added 2 years earlier as a supplemental power source for the communications equipment. It was not on the emergency power plan because it had been installed after the emergency documentation was last updated. Caleb knew about it because he had done the safety compliance check on it 8 months ago. It had a maximum output of 3 kilowatts. Enough for communications, medical monitoring, and critical lighting. He walked out the door into the rain. He found the solar installation controller in the communications utility structure, bypassed the automated switching that had been disabled by the main power failure, and brought the battery bank online manually. It took him 11 minutes. When he came back through the operations room door, his jacket was soaked through. Rachel looked at him. Power, she said. Partial. Enough for what we need. How did you... It was in the compliance documentation from last spring. It wasn't on the emergency plan. He moved back to the map. It is now. 3:16 in the afternoon. Derek's second check-in. Operations South Team. We are mobile and returning. 9 personnel plus R12. 1 carry assist in progress. Morris is being carried by 2 volunteers. He's stable. Current pace is slower than projected estimate. We're looking at 110 to 120 minutes to return, not 90. Terrain is significantly worse than the outbound trip. Rachel relayed the update to Caleb. He looked at the map. At Derek's projected position. At the weather timeline. Tell him to hold current pace. Don't push it. Slow and steady through the wet terrain is better than a fall. Confirmed. Anything else for him? Caleb looked at the map for a moment. Tell him he's doing exactly right. Rachel transmitted it. Derek's acknowledgement came back with the particular quality of a man who has received a piece of information he didn't know he needed until it arrived. 3:22 in the afternoon. The twist came from a direction nobody had anticipated. Frank Dupree came through the operations door with an expression that Caleb had not seen on him in 2 years of working alongside him. Not alarmed, not panicked, but the particular expression of a man who has just processed something and needs to deliver it carefully. "We have a situation with the East equipment cache," Frank said. Caleb looked at him. "The cache that was tampered with," Frank said. "The one with the evidence of forced entry." "What about it?" "I went to verify the emergency signaling equipment for the inventory. The cache has been opened again." A pause. "The emergency signaling flares are gone. All of them. And the cache contains something that wasn't there before." He held up a waterproof equipment bag. Caleb crossed to him and took it. He opened it. Inside was a handheld radio, not a standard competition radio, not an Iron Ridge unit, but a military specification encrypted communications device of the type Caleb recognized immediately and did not expect to see on a civilian emergency response competition site. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the frequency settings. He looked at Frank. "Where did this come from?" Frank said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He thought about the unauthorized access, the moved markers, the generator component that had been replaced with an identical incorrect part, the access road collapse that had blocked the primary egress. Each of those things individually had an innocent explanation. Taken together with this radio in his hands, they told a different story. Someone had been on this site before this event with a specific purpose. The flares being removed was not theft flares, were not valuable. The flares being removed meant someone did not want those flares available during this specific event. And the radio being placed meant someone wanted a specific communications capability present that was not part of the official event infrastructure. Caleb's training had given him a particular skill for pattern recognition in ambiguous situations. The pattern here was not ambiguous. Someone had intended for this event to become an emergency. The question was why. "Lock this room," Caleb said to Frank. "Nobody comes in or out except our core team. Don't tell anyone what you found yet." Frank nodded and moved to the door. Caleb picked up his radio. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I need Gerald Hutchins in this room, right now." A pause. "Caleb, Gerald is in the medical tent helping Doc with—" "Right now, Rachel." She heard the quality of his voice. "Copy," she said. Gerald Hutchins came through the door 4 minutes later, moving faster than his hip usually allowed. He looked at Caleb, then at the radio on the table. His face did the same thing it had done in the front row of the exhibition, the thing where the color changed. "You recognize that," Caleb said. Gerald sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "That's a TACOM 7, he said. "Encrypted tactical communications device. Standard issue for certain joint special operations elements." He looked at Caleb. "The type that gets fielded when a team is operating in a location where they don't want their communications tracked by standard military monitoring." "What kind of team uses that in a civilian location?" "The kind that's not supposed to be in a civilian location," Gerald said. Caleb stood very still. "Gerald, is there anyone at this event who would have reason to want to communicate outside standard channels?" Gerald looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know who," he said, "but I know what I'm looking at. And I know what it means when someone places a covert communications device in a civilian facility. It means someone was planning to use this location for something other than what it's being used for." "Yes, or someone was planning to use this situation," Caleb said quietly. "A controlled emergency, isolated site, compromised communications, 200 people who can't leave." Gerald was very quiet. "You think this was manufactured," he said. "I think some of it was accelerated," Caleb said. "The storm was real. The storm was always coming. But the road collapse, the generator component failure, the marker relocation, the missing flares." He paused. "Someone took a situation that was going to be difficult and made sure it became critical." "To what end?" Caleb looked at the radio. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know that 200 people on an isolated site in a crisis are a very controllable population." He picked up the radio. "And someone wanted to control this population." 3:48 in the afternoon. Derek's third check-in came in 4 minutes late. The delay was 11 seconds over Caleb's 15-minute standard, and those 11 seconds produced a specific quality of attention in the operations room that outsiders would not have recognized as fear, but was closely related to it. Then the radio crackled. "Operations, this is South Team. We have a problem." Rachel looked at Caleb. Caleb picked up the radio. "Derek, what's your situation?" "We're at the footbridge junction. The north return route is compromised. The secondary creek has overflowed its banks. The 40-meter detour you gave me is underwater. We have 21 people and 1 carry assist, and we cannot cross what's in front of us." A pause. "I need options." Caleb looked at the map. He looked at it for 8 seconds. "How deep is the overflow?" "Mid-thigh on Crawford." He went in to check. "It's fast." "How wide?" 30 feet, maybe 35. Caleb looked at the equipment inventory list. "Derek, do you have the emergency rope kit?" "Yes." 2 anchor trees on your side of the crossing." A pause. Then, "Yes. Cedar both of them. Big enough." "Set a tension traverse. Both ropes parallel. 8-inch spacing. Anchor high on both trees, chest height for the crossing members. You go first, set the far anchor, come back. Then you bring people across one at a time with the rope as a balance line." A silence. Derek was processing it. "I've never done a tension traverse," he said. "I know," Caleb said. "I'm going to talk you through it." What followed was 12 minutes of radio-guided instruction that Rachel would later describe as the most precise thing she had ever heard. Caleb's voice, steady and specific. Breaking a technical rope technique into sequential physical actions, clear enough that a man standing in the rain in deteriorating conditions with 21 people counting on him could execute it correctly the first time. Derek asked 3 questions. Caleb answered all 3 before Derek finished asking them. At the end of 12 minutes, Derek said, "Traverse is set. I'm going across to anchor the far side." "Go," Caleb said. 2 minutes later, far anchor is set, coming back. "Good. Start your crossing. Smallest person first." "That's Morris." "Then start with Morris." 4:16 in the afternoon. 21 people across a flooded 30-foot crossing in deteriorating weather conditions. It took 23 minutes. Every one of them made it. When Derek's radio check-in came at 4:19, all 21 personnel across mobile continuing return. The operations room exhaled collectively with the particular release of people who have been holding something very carefully for a long time. Rachel put her radio down for 4 seconds. Just 4 seconds. Then she picked it back up. But in those 4 seconds, her face showed everything she had been managing since 2:17. Caleb watched her do it. He did not give her space for it because the situation did not permit space, but he noted it and filed it under the category of things he would address when there was time, which would be later, and he would make sure later arrived. 4:29 in the afternoon. The encrypted radio on the table activated. Not loudly. A single pulse of indicator light, the kind that signals an incoming query on a frequency. Everyone in the room went still. Caleb looked at it. He looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at the radio and said nothing. Caleb picked it up. He looked at the frequency. He looked at the activation code displayed in the indicator window. He processed what those 2 things together meant in terms of the operational context he understood from his years in naval special warfare. Then he set the radio back on the table without responding. "Caleb," Gerald said carefully. "Someone just queried this device," Caleb said, "checking if it's been activated." "Do you know who?" "No, but I know what frequency they're using." He paused. "It's a coordination channel, not a command channel, which means there's more than one person and they're lateral to each other." "You're not going to respond?" "Not yet." He looked at the device. If they think the device is unactivated, still in the cache, they'll assume their position is unchanged. They'll continue whatever they're doing. And if they figure out we found it, then the situation changes, Caleb said, and we deal with the new situation. He looked at Frank. "I need a quiet inventory of every face at this event that you don't personally recognize from prior Iron Ridge contact," he said. "Participants, contractors, visitors. Anyone you can't place? Frank nodded. He went out the door. 4:41 in the afternoon. Derek came back. All 21 people. Every single one. He came through the main tent door with Morris over 2 volunteers' shoulders, and Crawford steadying a woman who had twisted her ankle in the final quarter mile, and Ricky Salazar, who had somehow ended up in the South team without Derek noticing until they were already moving, carrying a pack that was not his on top of his own gear. Derek walked into the operations room and put both hands on the map table and breathed for 20 seconds. Then he straightened. He looked at Caleb. 21, he said. All 21. Caleb looked at him. Good, he said. Derek nodded. He looked at the map, then at the encrypted radio on the table, then back at Caleb. What's that? He said. A complication we're managing. Derek looked at it for a moment. Is this situation over? He said. The weather situation is beginning to moderate, Caleb said. External response is approximately 90 minutes out. We have everyone accounted for, sheltered, medically stable. A pause. The weather situation is manageable. But, Derek said. Caleb looked at him. But someone wanted this event to become what it became, he said. And I don't yet know if they got what they were looking for. Derek absorbed that. What do you need from me? He said. Right now, stay visible in the main tent. Talk to people. Keep energy calm. People are tired and stressed, and the next 90 minutes of waiting are going to be harder emotionally than the last 2 hours were physically. You want me to be a presence? I want you to do what you're actually good at, Caleb said. You connect with people. Use it. Derek looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. He went out. 5:03 in the afternoon. Frank came back with his inventory. He had identified 4 individuals he could not place in the event registration. 3 listed as event contractors by the external management firm. 1 listed as a sponsor representative. All 4 had arrived on site through the normal check-in process. All 4 had standard event credentials. All 4 had arrived on the same vehicle. Caleb looked at the 4 names Frank had written down. He looked at the encrypted radio. He looked at the topographic map, specifically at the area around the collapsed access road. The access road had not simply failed under storm runoff. He had known that since he saw the drainage pattern. The failure was structural, the kind of structural failure that happens when the subsurface support material has been compromised in a specific way. Someone had prepared that road failure, not during the storm, before the event, during one of the unauthorized access visits. Caleb sat down. I was not tired. He was the opposite of tired in the way that people who operate at his level sometimes reach a state that looks like calm from the outside, but is actually the highest register of full engagement. Every system running, every available input being processed, nothing being wasted. He was thinking about a mission 7 years ago. I was thinking about it, not because the memory was intruding, but because there was a pattern here that rhymed with a pattern he had encountered before. A manufactured crisis, an isolated location, a population that couldn't leave, a communications infrastructure compromised at multiple points. He had seen this architecture before. 7 years ago, the target of that architecture had been 2 individuals who needed to be removed from a specific location under cover of an emergency that created the justification for extraction. He looked at the participant list. 193 people. Most of them were exactly what they appeared to be. Veterans, first responders, emergency management professionals. People who had come here for a competition and found themselves in a real emergency and had managed it with the particular competence of people who trained for exactly this. But someone on that list was not what they appeared to be. Caleb did not know who yet. He thought about the encrypted radio query. The lateral coordination frequency. 2 or more people working horizontally. He thought about the flares being removed. Not to create darkness, there was plenty of other lighting, but to prevent signaling. To prevent someone at this event from signaling externally in a way that was not controlled by the communication infrastructure. The people who had prepared this situation had compromised. Someone at this event was trying to prevent a specific person from being able to call for help through channels that this person's handlers didn't monitor. He looked at the list again. He looked at it differently this time. Not as a population to protect. As a document containing one name that someone had gone to significant lengths to place in an isolated location under controlled conditions. 5:27 in the afternoon. Rachel came and stood beside him. She looked at the list. She looked at him. "You know something," she said. "I have a hypothesis." "Tell me." He looked at her. "This event was selected because of who was attending it," he said. "Not because of what it was. The competition was incidental. The participant list was the variable." He paused. "Someone on that list is someone another party needs isolated access to." Rachel was very still. "Who? I don't know yet." He looked at the list. "But I'm going to find out before that external response arrives. Because once external response arrives and the situation normalizes, whoever this is disappears back into the population and the opportunity, whatever it was, is gone." Rachel looked at the door. "Derek is in the main tent," she said. "Yes." "Should I bring him back in?" Caleb thought about it. "Not yet," he said. "Let him keep doing what he's doing. He's holding that room together, and I need that room held together." And the four individuals Frank identified. Monitor their position. Don't approach. Don't alert. And the radio. Caleb looked at the encrypted device on the table. It had not pulsed again. It was waiting. "Leave it exactly where it is," he said. He stood. He picked up his own radio. He looked at Doc Riley through the window of the medical tent. Doc moving between patients with the steady calm of a man who has made peace with difficult situations. Checking on Anderson, adjusting a bandage, saying something that made a 23-year-old with a sprained wrist laugh despite himself. He looked at Derek in the main tent, visible through the far window, moving through the crowd of tired and wet and stressed competition participants, with his jacket open and his hands out, talking to people with the natural ease of a man discovering that the same quality that made him a compelling competitor made him genuinely useful in a moment like this. He looked at Rachel, who was holding this entire operation together with the particular grip of a person who has found out what they're capable of, and is not going to be less than that. He thought about Sophie. She would be at the academy right now. Rachel had sent word 3 hours ago through a staff member. Sophie knew her father was at the mountain site managing the emergency. She was with Frank's wife who had picked her up from school at 3:30. She was safe. He thought about Emily. He thought about the promise he had made standing at her grave in the January cold, the ground frozen. Sophie's small hand in his. No more missions. No more glory. No more risking himself when his daughter needed him to come home. He had kept that promise for 7 years. He thought about the one he had not been able to keep. 7 years ago. The extraction point. The window closing faster than projected. The decision about who went first and who went last and what that sequence meant when the window closed completely before the sequence was finished. Marcus Webb had been 26 years old. He had been the best point man Caleb had ever worked with. He had gone last because Caleb had ordered him last, and the window had closed, and Marcus Webb had not come home. Caleb had carried that decision for 7 years. He carried it right now in this room, with the weight exactly as heavy as it had always been. But he had also carried something else for 7 years. The understanding that the decision he had made had brought 7 other operators home. That the sequence he had chosen with the information he had at the time had maximized the number of people who returned. That there had been no sequence that brought everyone home, and the decision between bad outcomes and worse outcomes was still a decision that had to be made by someone. He had made it. He still carried it. And he was still here. He picked up his radio. He walked toward the main tent. He had a hypothesis to confirm, and approximately 90 minutes before the external response arrived and the window closed. He was not going to let the window close with the wrong outcome. Not again. Not this time. 5:31 in the afternoon. He walked through the door into the main tent. 193 people. He began moving through them, not fast, not visibly purposeful. The way he moved through any room with the systematic ground-covering attention of a man who is cataloging everything he sees without appearing to catalog anything. Derek saw him come in. He watched Caleb move through the crowd. He recognized the movement. He had seen it before on a mountain in deteriorating weather-reading terrain that was trying to kill them. The same quality. The same systematic completeness. Derek stepped out of the conversation he was in. He moved quietly to the edge of the room. He watched Caleb work. And he understood watching it that this was what a real search looked like. Not aggressive. Not obvious. Just a man moving through a space making contact with what the space contained, assembling a picture with the patience of someone who knows exactly what he's looking for and is going to find it. Derek crossed his arms. He waited. He was ready when Caleb needed him. 5:31 in the afternoon. Caleb moved through the main tent, the way water moves through a room, finding every corner without appearing to rush, touching every surface without appearing to search. 193 people, tired and wet and running on the particular adrenaline residue of people who have been through something real and are still processing whether it's over. He had been in the tent 4 minutes when he found the first thread. It was not dramatic. It was a man standing slightly too still near the east wall. One of the 4 individuals Frank had flagged listed on the contractor manifest as an event logistics coordinator named Daniel Reyes. He was holding a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His eyes were moving through the crowd in a specific pattern that Caleb recognized not as casual crowd watching, but as active scanning, someone looking for a specific face in a specific location. Caleb did not look at him directly. He moved to the beverage station 12 feet away and poured himself a cup of coffee. He didn't intend to drink and used the next 90 seconds to establish what Daniel Reyes was scanning for. The pattern resolved in 60 seconds. Reyes was watching a woman seated at the far end of the tent. 50s, short gray hair, wearing a first responder jacket from a Phoenix, Arizona organization. She was talking to 2 other participants, laughing at something completely at ease. Her body language said exhausted but fine. Her registration listed her as Catherine Park Emergency Management Coordinator, attending as part of a corporate team. Caleb looked at Catherine Park for 30 seconds. She was good. Her ease was genuine looking. Her conversation was natural. She made eye contact with the people she was talking to in exactly the proportions that normal people use, not the proportions that trained people use when they're performing normality. But she was also positioned with her back to the main structural support of the tent, giving her a sight line to both tent exits simultaneously. And her right hand, resting on the table beside her coffee cup, was positioned in the specific way that left-handed people rest their dominant hand when they want it available quickly. Catherine Park was not an emergency management coordinator from Phoenix. Caleb took a sip of coffee he didn't taste. He walked back out of the tent. 5:44 in the afternoon. Derek was waiting for him at the edge of the operations room. "You found something," Derek said. "2 people," Caleb said. He kept moving toward the operations room door. "One is watching the other. The one being watched doesn't know it yet." Derek followed him inside. Rachel was at her station. Gerald was in the corner chair. Frank was by the door. The encrypted radio sat on the table exactly where Caleb had left it. Caleb went to the participant list. He found Catherine Park's registration. He read the organizational affiliation, the contact information, the emergency contact listed. The emergency contact was a phone number with a Washington, D.C. area code. He looked at Gerald. "Phoenix Emergency Management Coordinator," he said. 50s gray hair, first responder jacket, left-handed, back-to-wall positioning, dual exit sightline. Gerald looked at him. He said nothing. "Gerald," Caleb said. Gerald stood up from his chair. He walked to the participant list. He read Catherine Park's registration. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need to make a phone call." "To who?" "Someone who can tell me if what I'm thinking is accurate," Gerald said. "And if it is." He paused. "Then this situation is significantly more complicated than a weather emergency." "Make the call," Caleb said. Gerald took out his personal cell phone. He looked at the signal strength. 1 bar, he said. Solar installation brought the communications repeater back up partially, Caleb said. The southeast corner of this building has the strongest signal. Gerald moved to the southeast corner. He dialed. He turned away from the room and spoke quietly, and nobody in the room could hear what he said. They could hear that he said it with the particular controlled urgency of a man who has been in enough serious situations to know how to communicate importance without communicating panic. The call lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. When Gerald turned back around, his face had completed the journey from concern to something that Caleb recognized as the expression of a man who has just had a hypothesis confirmed that he was hoping would be wrong. Her name is not Catherine Park, Gerald said. She is a federal witness currently under an informal protection arrangement. She was placed in this event 6 weeks ago by a protective services team as part of a low-profile relocation protocol, not formal witness protection, an informal arrangement that relied on anonymity rather than active security. The room was completely silent. The people watching her, Gerald continued, are almost certainly assets deployed by the party. She is scheduled to testify against a federal procurement fraud case. Trial begins in 11 days. They manufactured this emergency, Rachel said. Not entirely, Gerald said. But they amplified it. The storm was real. The isolation they accelerated. The communications they compromised. The flares they removed. He looked at Caleb. They needed her isolated, unable to signal outside their controlled communications environment long enough to extract her, Caleb said. Or eliminate the testimony, Gerald said quietly. One of the two. Derek said, there are 4 of them on site. At least 4, Caleb said, and we have no external response for another. Derek looked at the clock. 74 minutes. 74 minutes, Caleb confirmed. What do we do? Caleb looked at the encrypted radio. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. He set it back down. He looked at the map. At the positions of the 4 flagged individuals Frank had identified. At the location where Catherine Park was sitting in the main tent. At the operations room they were standing in. At the exits, the access points, the structural layout of the facility. He was quiet for 20 seconds. Then, we do not move her, he said. Moving her confirms that we know. If we confirm that we know, they accelerate their timeline, and we lose the controlled variable. The controlled variable being, Derek said. The fact that they don't know we found the radio, Caleb said. They queried it once. It didn't respond. They're operating under the assumption that it's still in the cache undiscovered. That means they believe their communications architecture is intact, and we are managing a weather emergency exactly as it appears. So we let them think that, Rachel said. We let them think that, Caleb confirmed. For 64 minutes. And then external response arrives, Derek said. External response arrives with significantly more context than a standard emergency call, Caleb said. He looked at Gerald. Can you reach your contact again? With 1 bar yes. Tell them what we have. Tell them the nature of the situation. Tell them we need the response team to include personnel capable of handling a federal witness protection situation. He paused. And tell them to arrive without lights and sirens. Gerald was already moving to the southeast corner. 5:58 in the afternoon. The 64 minutes that followed were the most disciplined thing Derek Vance had ever witnessed. Caleb re-entered the main tent. He did not avoid Reyes. He did not steer around the sightlines of the other 3 flagged individuals. He moved through the tent with the same systematic, unhurried attention as before, refilling coffee, checking in with Doc Riley's medical team, making himself visible as exactly what he was supposed to be, the site coordinator managing a weather emergency. He stopped near Catherine Park's table. He introduced himself as the logistics coordinator. He asked her group how they were holding up. He told them external response was roughly an hour out. He made a small joke about the generator situation that was specific enough to be credible and bland enough to be forgettable. Catherine Park looked at him. For a fraction of a second, less than a second, the kind of interval that only exists if you know to look for it, her eyes asked him a question. Caleb answered it without words. A small nod. Almost nothing. The kind of nod that looks like a man acknowledging that the conversation is wrapping up. Her shoulders dropped approximately 3 millimeters. She understood. She returned to her conversation. Caleb moved on. Derek watched all of it from the far end of the tent and felt for the first time in his adult life that he was watching an expert operate in their actual domain. Not a gym, not a competition, not a curated professional environment with agreed-upon rules and safety margins and an audience. A real situation, with real stakes. And a man navigating it with the total commitment of someone for whom the cost of failure was not a loss on a record, but something he could not afford to carry. 6:12 in the afternoon. 47 minutes remaining. The second radio query came in at 6:14. The encrypted device pulsed twice a different pattern from the first query. Not a status check. A coordination signal. The kind used when a team is establishing a shared timing reference. Caleb looked at it. He looked at the clock. He looked at Gerald, who had returned from his second call. "They're synchronizing," Caleb said. "They're moving their timeline up," Gerald said. Something changed. What changed? Gerald was quiet for a moment. "The external response," he said. "If they have any monitoring capability on the county emergency services frequency, and if they've been operating at this level, they almost certainly do. They know help is coming. They know they have less time than they planned for." "How much less time?" "Based on the coordination signal pattern," Gerald said, "I'd estimate they're planning to move in the next 20 to 30 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes, Derek said. Everyone in the room recalibrated. The 74-minute cushion had just become 25. Caleb looked at the map. He looked at it the way he had looked at terrain on the mountain, reading it, not describing it. Finding what it offered and what it didn't. "They need to move her from the main tent to a vehicle," he said. "The only vehicle access right now is the East Fire Road. The primary road is collapsed, the south approach is flooded. East Fire Road is the only way in or out until county response clears the primary." "So they move her east," Rachel said. "They try to move her east," Caleb said. "Through a crowd of 193 people." He paused. 4 operators, 1 target, confined space, witnesses everywhere. He looked at the group. "They're not going to do this with force. They're going to do this with a pretext." "What kind of pretext?" "Something that gives them legitimate-looking reason to move her out of the main tent without triggering a response from the crowd." He thought for a moment. "Medical. They'll manufacture a medical situation that requires her to be moved to the medical tent, which is separate from the main structure. Once she's isolated in the medical tent with controlled access. They take her," Derek said. "Or they do whatever they came here to do," Caleb said. He looked at Doc Riley through the window. "I need Doc in this room," he said to Frank. "Right now, quietly." Doc came through the door in 40 seconds. He read the room in 5. "Tell me," he said. Caleb told him in 90 seconds, stripped to the essential facts. Doc listened without expression. When Caleb finished, Doc said, "You think they'll use a fake medical call to pull her?" "Yes." "So when the call comes in, I shouldn't go." "When the call comes in," Caleb said, "you go, exactly as you normally would. You go, you assess, you find nothing acute, you bring her back to the main tent and tell everyone she's fine." Doc looked at him. "And the reason for that is..." "Because if you don't respond, they know we know," Caleb said. "If you respond and find nothing wrong, they have to abort the pretext and find another one. Every pretext they abort costs them time." He paused. "And time is what we need." Doc nodded once. "I'll go when they call," he said. "I'll take my time getting there and my time evaluating." He looked at Caleb with the expression of a man who has done field medicine in genuinely dangerous situations and is drawing on that history right now. "And I'll bring her back safe." "Yes," Caleb said. "You will." 6:27 in the afternoon. The medical call came in at 6:29. A woman in the main tent, one of the 4 flagged contractors, the only woman among them registered as a sponsor representative, approached Doc Riley's assistant and said that the woman at the far table, the gray-haired one, had mentioned feeling dizzy and possibly having chest symptoms. Doc's assistant relayed it to Doc. Doc picked up his kit. He walked to the main tent with the unhurried professionalism of a man who has evaluated hundreds of field medical situations and knows that urgency is calibrated to actual findings, not reported symptoms. He reached Catherine Park. He crouched beside her. He spoke to her quietly, conducted a brief, visible assessment, checked her pulse at the wrist, asked her 2 questions. Catherine Park answered both questions with complete composure, while making brief eye contact with Doc that communicated without any words that she understood exactly what was happening. Doc took 3 minutes on his assessment. He told the people at her table that she was fine. Likely dehydration common in stress situations. He'd make sure she had fluids and she should stay seated. He stood. He moved toward the beverage station. He did not bring her to the medical tent. From his position near the tent entrance, Caleb watched the woman who had reported the symptoms. She was still. Her face had the controlled flatness of someone managing frustration while maintaining professional appearance. She pulled out her phone. She typed something. Caleb looked at the encrypted radio on the table behind him through the operations room window. It did not pulse. She was using a different channel. 6:38 in the afternoon. They have a secondary communication system, Caleb said to Rachel. The encrypted radio was a relay point. They have direct handheld communication between the team members. We can't monitor that without knowing the frequency, Rachel said. No, Caleb said. But we don't need to monitor it. We need to watch what they do next. What they did next took 4 minutes to materialize. Reyes, the man who had been watching Catherine Park since the beginning, moved from his position near the east wall. He walked through the tent with the particular deliberateness of someone who has received updated instructions and is executing them. He moved toward the tent's east exit. Not toward Catherine Park, toward the exit. Caleb understood immediately. They're repositioning, he said. They're not going to move her from inside. They're going to be waiting when she comes out. He looked at the clock. They're forcing a situation that requires her to leave the tent voluntarily. How? Derek said. And then the lights in the main tent went out. Not the emergency lighting that stayed on the battery-backed strips along the floor, providing enough visibility to navigate safely. But the propane heating units, which were on the same partial power circuit that Caleb had restored through the solar installation, went off simultaneously. The temperature in the tent began dropping immediately, and the announcement came from the east entrance, one of the flagged contractors, calm and professional sounding. The voice of someone who knows how to sound. Authoritative in an emergency. We have a heating situation in the main tent. We're routing everyone to the operations building and the secondary structure for the next 20 minutes while we address the fuel supply. Please move in an orderly fashion toward the east exit. 193 people, most of them beginning to stand, moving toward the east exit, where Reyes was waiting. 6:44 in the afternoon. Derek said, he's going to take her in the crowd. Yes, Caleb said. In front of 190 people. Crowd cover, darkness outside, controlled movement to a waiting vehicle. A pause. It's not a bad plan. What do we do? Caleb was already moving. Gerald, get back on the phone. Tell them we are out of time and we need someone on the East Fire Road right now. He looked at Frank. Go around the outside of the main tent, east side. Do not confront. Observe and report position. He looked at Rachel. Restore power to the main tent. The solar circuit. I need you to manually reroute the propane heating control back to the battery bank. Tell me how. He told her in 30 seconds. He looked at Derek. The crowd is moving east, he said. I need it moving north. Derek looked at him. I have no authority to. You have something better than authority, Caleb said. You have their attention. You've had their attention for the last 2 hours. Use it. Derek held his gaze for 1 second. Then he went out the door at a run. Caleb went the other direction. He came around the south side of the main tent and entered through the south entrance, the one the crowd was not using, and moved through the space against the flow of people heading east. Finding Catherine Park's position by memory, navigating toward her through the emergency lighting strips and the moving bodies. He found her 12 feet from the east exit. Reyes was 6 feet ahead of her, positioned to receive her when she came through the door. Caleb reached her. He put his hand on her arm, not grabbing, not directing, just a point of contact, and said quietly, close enough that only she could hear, "Don't go through that door." She stopped moving. She looked at him. "They're outside," he said. She held his eyes for 1 second. She turned around. She moved with him back through the crowd against the flow. At the east exit, Reyes turned to receive her. She wasn't there. He scanned. He didn't find her immediately. His reaction was small, a fractional stiffening, a shift in his scanning pattern, but in the emergency lighting it was visible to someone watching for it. From outside, Frank's radio transmission came in. 2 vehicles on the East Fire Road, both running. 2 individuals near the vehicles. The crowd stopped moving east, because Derek Vance's voice had just filled the main tent, with the particular carrying quality of a man who has spent years commanding rooms, not through electronics, just through the natural projection of someone who knows how to use his voice. "Hey, listen up. Change of plan. The operations team has the heating issue handled. We're routing north, not east. North exit, everyone through the north. More space, warmer structure. North." He said it with the complete confidence of someone who absolutely had this information and was passing it on, and the crowd, tired and cold, and trusting the person who had been most visibly competent and present for the last 2 hours, shifted. North. Away from the east exit. Away from Reyes. Away from the 2 running vehicles on the East Fire Road. Rachel restored power to the heating circuit at 6:47. The propane units came back on. The lights came back on. The crowd, now moving north, encountered the restored warmth and the returning light, and naturally began slowing, milling, reassessing whether the move was necessary. The manufactured pretext evaporated. Reyes stood at the east exit with nowhere to take anyone, and a position that was now in the restored lighting, visible to the entire room. 6:51 in the afternoon. External response arrived 19 minutes early. Not with lights and sirens. 3 vehicles on the East Fire Road County Emergency Management, plus 2 that were not County Emergency Management and carried no external markings. The vehicles that were not county arrived first. The people in them were not emergency management personnel. They moved through the site with the particular quiet efficiency of people who know exactly where they're going and what they're going to find when they get there, and they found it. And the situation on the East Fire Road resolved in a way that Caleb did not witness directly, because he was inside the main tent, with his hand on Catherine Park's arm, and his back to the east exit, blocking her from the view of the remaining flagged individuals, until the radio transmission from Frank confirmed the situation was contained. Frank's transmission. "East Road is clear. Say again, East Road is clear." Caleb exhaled. He let go of Catherine Park's arm. She turned and looked at him. "How long did you know?" she said. "About 2 hours," he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been running a very long time and has just for the first time in weeks been allowed to stop. "Thank you," she said. Caleb looked at her. "Doc Riley will take you to the operations building," he said. "Someone will come for you there." He moved away from her. He found Doc at the edge of the room and said 4 words. "She needs you now." Doc went. 7:03 in the afternoon. The site was fully operational again within 30 minutes of the external response arriving. The county emergency management teams handled the crowd coordination, the medical follow-up, the access road situation. The primary road was assessed and a temporary bypass was opened by 7:40, allowing vehicle egress for the full population. By 8:15, most of the 193 participants were gone. The site was quiet in the particular way that places go quiet after they have been loud for a long time. Caleb sat on the equipment bench outside the operations building with his hands on his knees and his jacket open and his eyes on the middle distance. He was not thinking about anything specific. He was doing the thing that people who operate at his level do in the intervals between letting the system decompress, allowing the sustained engagement to release, waiting for the ordinary version of himself to return. Rachel found him there. She sat down beside him without preamble. She did not ask how he was. She had known him long enough to understand that the question would not produce a useful answer and was not what he needed. She said, "You knew from the radio." "I suspected from this radio. The pattern of unauthorized access gave me the framework. The radio confirmed the operational intent." Gerald's contact, were they monitoring this event? "I don't know the full picture," Caleb said. "I know Catherine Park was being protected through an informal channel. I know that informal channel had a gap in it, and someone exploited that gap." He paused. "The people who came in the unmarked vehicles will sort out the rest." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Is she safe now?" "She'll be in formal protection by morning," Caleb said. "The informal arrangement is over." "Because of tonight." "Because tonight made clear that informal was insufficient." Rachel looked at her hands. 200 people on that site, she said. "And you managed all of it. The weather, the rescue, the criminal operation. All of it simultaneously for 6 hours." Caleb said nothing. "And 2 months ago you were telling me that one of the impact barriers needed replacing," Rachel said. "It did need replacing." "Caleb." He looked at her. "Why are you here?" she said. It was not a challenging question. It was the question of a person who has watched someone do something extraordinary and is genuinely trying to understand the gap between what they saw and what they thought they knew. You could do anything. You could direct any security operation in the country. You could name your position, your salary, your team. People with a fraction of what you demonstrated tonight have careers in this field that look nothing like. She stopped. "Why are you fixing impact barriers?" Caleb looked out at the cleared lot. He was quiet for a long time. "Emily died on a Tuesday," he said. "February. Sophie was in the car with her. She was 5. A pause. "She wasn't injured, but she was in the car when it happened, and she sat there for 11 minutes before the first responders arrived." Rachel was completely still. 11 minutes, he said. 5 years old, alone in that car. He looked at his watch, the old watch, the stripped case. "I was 3,000 miles away on an operation I cannot describe. I found out 6 hours later." Another pause. "I made it home in 14 hours. Sophie was with Emily's sister. When I walked through the door, she looked at me like—" He stopped. He looked at the ground. "Like she had been waiting for something solid to hold on to, and I was the only solid thing left." Rachel said nothing. "I promised her," Caleb said. Not out loud. "I never said it to her directly because she was 5, and she didn't need to carry my promise. I promised myself. No more disappearing. No more operations. No more being 3,000 miles away when something that cannot be fixed happens in 11 minutes. He looked at Rachel. "She needs a father who comes home, every day, at 3:15, before the bell rings." Rachel held that. "Then, you came home tonight," she said. "Yes. But you stayed until everyone else came home first." Caleb was quiet. "That never changes," he said. "That part doesn't change." 7:44 in the afternoon. Derek found him still on the bench. Rachel had gone inside to complete the incident documentation. The site was nearly empty. 2 county vehicles remained. The unmarked vehicles were long gone. Derek sat down on the other end of the bench. He didn't say anything immediately. They sat in the quiet for a while. 2 men at the end of a very long day, one of whom had been carrying something for 7 years, and the other of whom had just begun to understand what carrying something actually meant. "Maya's okay," Derek said. "I know. She told me what you did, on the footbridge, the anchor." He paused. "She said you saw it from 20 feet away. The plate gap was visible. She said you made a call in 2 seconds that would have taken most people 2 minutes. Caleb said nothing. "I've been thinking about the exhibition," Derek said. "About what I said, about the gloves." Derek. "Let me say it," Derek said. Caleb looked at him. Derek looked back. "I made you into something small because it was easier than looking at what you actually were," Derek said. "A man with a kid and a clipboard who didn't fight back. That was a story I could fit into my understanding of the world." He paused. "The real story didn't fit, so I made up a smaller one." "People do that," Caleb said. "I do that," Derek said. I specifically do that. To people I feel threatened by. I cut them down to a size I can manage. He looked at his hands. I've been doing it my whole career. Anyone who makes me feel uncertain, I find their weakness, and I press it. A pause. I pressed yours in front of 200 people. And then you carried 21 people back from a flooded crossing, Caleb said. In deteriorating conditions, on a timeline that cost you something. He paused. Those things exist together. They're both true. One of them cost you more than the other one cost me. Yes, Caleb said simply. Derek was quiet. The watch, he said. Caleb looked at his left wrist. Marcus Webb, he said. He was my point man, 7 years ago. He turned the watch over, looking at the stripped case. The mission that ended my career. He went last on the extraction sequence because I ordered him last. The window closed before he cleared. He paused. He was 26. Derek said nothing. I chose the sequence that brought 7 people home, Caleb said. The alternative sequence brought 6 home and didn't guarantee 7. He paused. I know the math. I've run the math every day for 7 years. He looked at the watch. But Marcus Webb was 26 years old, and I was the last voice he heard giving him instructions. The watch is from him, Derek said quietly. I took it off his wrist before we extracted, Caleb said. I've worn it since, so I don't forget what command costs. He put his hand over it. And so I don't forget what it's worth. Derek was quiet for a long time. Then he said, The exhibition. You could have ended it at any point. Yes. You chose not to. Yes. Why? Derek said. Specifically, you had every reason to shut me down. You had the standing, you had the capability. Why did you stand there and take it? Caleb looked at the dark lot. Because defeating you would have taken 10 seconds, he said. And 10 seconds of you losing on a mat would have taught you nothing. He paused. You needed to defeat yourself, and that takes longer than 10 seconds. Derek looked at him. Did I? He said. Defeat myself. Caleb considered the question. You're asking the wrong person, he said. You know what you did today. You know what you did on that mountain, and at that crossing, and in that tent. You know who you were when the situation stopped being controlled. He looked at Derek directly. The answer to your question lives in the gap between who you were at that exhibition and who you were at 6:40 tonight. That's your answer. Derek sat with that. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the black belt. He held it in both hands, looking at it. Then he held it out to Caleb. Caleb looked at it. He looked at Derek. He did not take it. Keep it, he said. After everything. Keep it, Caleb said again. Just make sure the man wearing it deserves it. Derek looked at the belt in his hands. He folded it carefully. He put it back in his pocket. He sat with it there for a moment, and something in his posture changed, not visibly dramatic, but real. The belt had been a trophy before, a proof of superiority, an instrument of the story he told about himself. Now it was something else. Something that had weight without needing to be displayed. Something he was going to have to earn every day going forward, not just in competition, but in the harder discipline of being a person worth following. He understood the difference now. I understood it because he had watched it embodied for 6 hours in a man who wore a dead operator's watch and fixed impact barriers and left at 3:15. 8:07 in the afternoon. Caleb's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Frank's wife. Sophie's fine. She's helping me make dinner. She asked me to tell you she already did her homework. I'm not sure I believe her. Caleb looked at the text for a moment. Something moved across his face that Derek had not seen there before. Not the controlled neutrality, not the professional focus, not even the guarded openness of their conversations over the past weeks. Something completely undefended. Something that looked like a man who has held everything together for a very long time, reaching the moment where it's finally temporarily safe to let it go. He typed back, "Tell her I believe her. Home in an hour." He put the phone in his pocket. He stood. He looked at Derek. "Go home," he said. "Call your sister. She'll tell you she's fine, and she'll probably mean it, but call her anyway." Derek nodded. "Caleb." He stood. He extended his hand. "Thank you." Caleb took his hand. They shook not the grip of two men measuring each other the way men sometimes do, but the grip of two people who have been through something real together and have arrived at a version of mutual respect that does not require any further performance. "You did your job today," Caleb said. "That's all it ever is." He walked to his truck. He drove south toward San Diego and toward a 12-year-old girl who had done her homework and was helping make dinner and did not yet know the specific details of what her father had done that afternoon, but who would feel when he walked through the door that the solid thing she depended on had returned, as it always did, as it always would. 8:41 in the evening. The reporters arrived at Iron Ridge the following morning expecting Derek Vance. What they found was a story about 200 people who had been in genuine danger and had come home safe, and the survivors kept mentioning the same name. Not the undefeated black belt champion. Not the decorated competition record. Not the Instagram following, or the sponsorship relationships, or the things that made Derek Vance a marketable commodity in the martial arts world. They mentioned Caleb Warren, who had declined every interview, who had submitted his incident report, filed his revised emergency protocol, documentation, identified 17 systemic changes to the site management procedures, and returned to work on Monday morning at his normal time, wearing his normal clothes, carrying his normal clipboard. He was in the equipment room at 7:42 when Derek found him. Derek had spent the weekend thinking. He had called Maya 4 times. He had visited Gerald Hutchins. He had sat with Frank Dupree for 2 hours on Saturday evening and listened to Frank talk about what he had seen in men who operated at Caleb's level, and what it cost them, and what they chose to do with what it cost. He walked into the equipment room and stood there. Caleb looked up. "Something on your mind," Caleb said. "I want to change how I teach," Derek said. I want to build something into the program here that isn't about competition. That covers what I saw last week. The emergency response component. The leadership under pressure. He paused. The difference between winning and bringing people home. Caleb put down what he was holding. He looked at Derek for a moment. "Talk to Rachel," he said. "I want to talk to you." "I'll be part of it," Caleb said. "But Rachel runs the academy. Start there." Derek nodded. He started to leave. "Derek." He stopped. "What you just described," Caleb said. "Building something that teaches people to bring other people home instead of just winning." He paused. "That's the hardest thing to teach, and the most important." Derek looked at him. "Can you teach it?" "I can teach some of it," Caleb said. "The tactical components, the assessment skills." He picked up his clipboard. "But the willingness to put yourself between danger and someone else, the genuine willingness, not the performed version, that's something you can only teach by example." Derek was quiet. "Then I'll start practicing," he said. He left, and Caleb Warren returned to his work. The inventory check, the equipment inspection, the safety documentation, the 17 items on his revised protocol list with the same systematic attention he brought to everything. He worked until 3:05. He put his clipboard on the shelf. He picked up his jacket. He walked out to his truck and drove to Eastbrook Middle School and parked in the pickup line at 3:22, 8 minutes before the bell. Sophie came out at 3:31. She was walking with a friend talking about something that made her laugh. Her backpack riding high on her shoulders, the way 12-year-olds carry backpacks when they don't care about looking cool yet. She saw his truck, and her face did the thing it always did. A small involuntary brightening that she would probably train herself out of in a few years when being seen, being happy to see your father, became socially complicated. But not yet. She climbed in. She dropped her backpack. She said, "Mrs. Morrison gave us 17 pages of reading for tonight." 17, I counted. "Then we'd better start early," Caleb said. "Did you do anything interesting today?" He pulled out of the lot into the afternoon traffic. "Not particularly," he said. She accepted that the way she always accepted it, with the casual confidence of a 12-year-old who trusts that her father's days, however uninteresting they sound, are conducted by a man who will always be there at 3:30 in the right lane, second from the back. Exactly where she expects him. Exactly where he will always be. Because Caleb Warren had learned at the cost of everything he had once been, in places that never got named in 11 minutes of a Tuesday in February, that changed the shape of his life forever. That the most important command is